This is something creepy that happened when I was driving one time a few years ago. So I worked very late that night and left to go home at about midnight. I drove back home on the nearly empty roads. My house is in a neighborhood surrounded by mostly woods. There's a lot of wildlife out there as well. I remember that on the first 10 minutes of the drive, it went by just fine. Then I got to the turnoff near my neighborhood where things got more rural. As I was driving down a quiet road leading to my street, I saw this guy randomly standing on the left side of the road. It was really weird because there's no sidewalk in that area. There's just a small area between the line of the lane and where the pavement ends. It's barely enough space to walk on. Then there's a small amount of grass, maybe 5 feet, before the dense woods starts. The guy was wearing a hooded jacket covering most of his head. He was looking down, but also waving at me at the same time. It looked suspicious immediately, and I thought, there's no way I'm stopping. It was certainly suspicious. So I drove right past him and kept going. Then I turned onto my street and soon arrived home. I went inside only to realize that I forgot my phone at work. Now I thought about saying screw it and just going to bed, but also my alarm to get up is on my phone and I also wanted to use my phone. Work was only a little over 10 minutes away, so I decided to just go back. I left my house, got in my car, and set out onto the road again. I drove past that same spot and the guy who had been standing on the side of the road was gone. I didn't see him at all. I drove the rest of the way back to work, got my phone, and then drove back home. When I was on the way home though, I turned onto that one road again. This time I saw the guy up ahead jump out of the woods and onto the street suddenly. When he got out onto the street, he stood right in the middle of it and started waving his hands for me to stop. I slowed down and I didn't really have a choice to do anything other than stop. When I came to a stop, the man started walking forward, still in the middle of the street. At this point, I was more confused than anything, but my instincts hadn't really kicked in yet. Then the man started yelling at me to get out of the car. He was also making motions with his hands, I guess for me to open the door. That's when I knew I needed to get out of there. As he approached my driver's side door, I hit reverse. I backed up and the guy started running after me. At first, he was able to catch up, but I was able to go faster in reverse and get away from him. I backed up all the way to the end of that street. Then I turned and went forward down another road and sped up. I was able to get away from the guy completely, and I called the cops and reported him. Then I drove a different way back home. After I got back, I felt grateful to have made it home safely. I went inside and sometime later heard police sirens in the distance. I'm not sure if they were related to the guy or not. I never heard anything about it, but thankfully nothing like that has happened since. This happened last fall in early October. I'm a manager where I work. I had just locked the doors at 10 p.m. and was beginning the usual closing tasks when I got a call from my little brother. He's 17 years old and recently has really gotten into exploring abandoned buildings and climbing large structures like radio towers. I will be honest, his new hobby fills me with anxiety, but despite being a dumb teenager, he's still somewhat smart about his ventures. When I answered the phone, he was asking for my help and told me that he had been out exploring an abandoned house he'd come across. He was just about to leave when he said his car wasn't starting and the battery was dead. He also told me that he was alone. Usually he will be with a buddy, but he's got the kind of fearlessness where he doesn't bat an eye at a solo adventure. He didn't want to call our mom either because she was under the impression that he was at a friend's house, but instead he was a whole county away in the middle of nowhere alone. I was angry about his carelessness, but I decided to spare the lecture until I was actually with him. I told him to send me his location and I would be heading there soon. I got done closing around 10:30 p.m. and started speeding along the route the GPS took me. Usually I never speed, but the idea of my little brother out in some Alabama back road broken down alone didn't sit right with me. It took me about 40 minutes to get there. I started off on a pretty busy highway, then turned off onto a very remote highway and rode down that one for a long time. There was nothing but trees, fields, and the occasional tiny church. Eventually, I turned right down a very narrow dirt road that I nearly missed. I had to drive slowly. It was very unkempt and bumpy. The tree line on each side was so thick with darkness, and to be honest, the whole vibe of the place made me uneasy and gave me a bad feeling. I took an extremely sharp turn around a bend and saw my brother's car about a couple 100 feet up ahead. Not even 3 seconds after my headlights had shined onto his car, I saw him throw himself out of his car in complete hysterics. He sprinted towards my car, screaming at the top of the lungs for me to unlock the doors. I came to a halt and he jumped in. Not even giving me time to process his distress, he started shouting at me to get us out of there and that someone else was there. I immediately turned around and floored it off of that road. I'd never seen my brother in such a panicked state before. He was sobbing, having a full-blown panic attack. I sped down the road, and by the time we made it back to the main highway, he had calmed down. I asked him what happened and why he didn't call me sooner, but I realized that he had been too panicked to think about it. He said that about 20 or 25 minutes after he called asking for my help, he'd been sitting in his car listening to music and just staring off, when way down the road up ahead, a figure of a man or human appeared. He said he was worried at first that maybe it was a landowner coming to yell at him, but instead, the figure just stood in the middle of the road, seemingly looking towards him. It was too dark to make out anything about the figure, other than that they were clearly a person. He said that the person just stood there not moving for a good 3 or 4 minutes before they very slowly shifted to the right and vanished into the trees and darkness. At this point, pure panic had already set in for him, because he was sure they were staring at his car, and because of the unusual behavior of the figure. He said that they didn't pop up out of the trees until another 5 minutes had passed, but this time they moved a good distance closer. He was fully freaking out now, thinking that this person had to be messing with, or even worse, threatening him. He said he froze, his body not letting him do anything except stare out of his car windows in terror. The figure continued to stand in the middle of the road, and then they shifted back into the tree line once again. He said that the figure did that 2 more times, and each time they had inched a couple of feet closer to his car. He said they had been hiding in the trees again for about a minute when he saw my headlights behind him. The security of knowing that I was there gave him the courage to leap out of his car and make a break for it. The poor kid was so petrified he even left his phone behind in the car. We went back the next day around noon to jumpstart his car. My paranoid self even brought a weapon. The area was less threatening in the daytime. The abandoned house could be seen through the trees to the left of the road, and to the right, a couple hundred yards behind us, was a smaller road that led to a small radio tower. Given that it was bright out and my urge to know what happened, I poked around with my brother. Other than the house, the thick trees along the road, and the tower, there was nothing but fields to either side of us, no sign of a barn or farm or anything. I even looked around the ground floor of the house. My suspicion was maybe a squatter he missed in his venture was messing with him, but there was no sign of anyone living in the house. What unnerved me even more was the fact that around back of the house, a good stretch of the ground was littered in bones. They looked like cow vertebrae. There were hundreds of cleanly cut vertebrae everywhere. There weren't even cows in any of the fields nearby. I went back to the road and trekked past his car down the stretch where he said the person had been standing. It was a dusty dirt road, so I was looking for footprints or any evidence that something had been there, but there was nothing. After that, we jumped into the car. I dug into him a little bit and told him to never go exploring alone again. Then we left. I'm honestly at a loss for what he saw that night. He's not the type of kid to make up stories like this, and the level of distress that I saw him in, I don't think anybody could fake either. One fall night, I was driving back home from a friend's house right before midnight. The highway I was driving on stretched out before me for miles, dark and empty. I'd been driving for about an hour when suddenly, at the edge of my high beams, a bunch of things blocked the entire road as they walked across. I would have guessed it to be a herd of animals, but as I approached a little bit closer to get a better look, my headlights illuminated a cluster of figures crossing the road. It was so strange. In the middle of nowhere, miles away from any town or even a gas station, there was a large group of people crossing the road together, maybe about 20 of them, seemingly unaware of my presence. It was so strange though, because they were all dressed in dark clothing, and I couldn't make out any faces since they were covered by hoods, and not a single person looked towards my car. They were confident that they wouldn't get hit, or just didn't care, I guess. The way they walked was even weirder though, as they all had an odd clunky looking gait, and they were very spaced out, with nobody standing really that near each other. It was very unsettling. I slowed down to stop, and waited for the last of the group to finish crossing the highway. I glanced out my windows and into the rearview mirror to see if I was being set up for a robbery or something else, but there was nothing that I could see around me, just darkness. As the group continued to cross, I even rolled my window down a bit to see if I could hear anything. I heard nothing. No one spoke or made any sort of noise, and in the whole walk across, not even one of them acknowledged that I was there or looked my way. They just moved as a unit, sort of shuffling across the highway until disappearing into the woods on the other side. I had no idea how to process what I had just saw, but I kept driving and hoped that there was a logical explanation to the sighting I had just seen, even though I couldn't think of one. About 10 minutes later, as I was continuing down the road, I finally saw another car, which was a relief after how nervous I was feeling. As the car passed me, I noticed the driver looking my way with an expression of either confusion or fear. I wondered why in the world they would look at me like that, but I soon found out why. I watched in the rearview mirror as they slowed down, almost stopping before speeding off into the night. Behind me, illuminated just a bit by the moonlight, I once again saw a group of figures had emerged from the side of the highway and began crossing. That's what the other driver had seen when I thought they were looking at me. It was another group of figures like I had seen, about 20 of them, walking in that same fashion across the road. There was no way it could have been the same group I just saw 10 minutes earlier down the road. That was by far the creepiest and most unexplainable thing I have ever seen while driving. This happened several months ago while I was driving across the country. I didn't feel that it was necessary to get a hotel room for the night, so I decided to sleep for a few hours at a Pilot travel stop. There was a parking area on the side of the building with 3 or 4 rows of spaces. The furthest row was near a fenced-off area. Most of the spots were filled with trucks and vans, likely other drivers who had also stopped to rest. I parked my car in a space closest to the main building since it had the most light, and I decided to get some rest. I had been asleep in the driver's seat for about an hour when I was suddenly startled awake by the sound of somebody walking near my door. I looked over and saw a guy starting to walk away. Then he turned around, saw that I was awake and looking at him, gave a little wave, and started walking back towards my car. He said, "Hey man, sorry to wake you, but my car won't start, and I was wondering if you could give me a jump." I was half awake and groggy, and for some reason I just kind of mumbled, "Sure, I guess." He replied, "Great, follow me around." So I started my car and drove around to where he was walking. He led me to the far back row of the parking area in the back corner near the fence. At this point, I was starting to realize how shady this situation felt. I stopped my car about halfway down the road thinking, just back up and drive off. He saw that I had stopped and started waving at me to pull forward. For some stupid reason I did, but I kept my windows up and the doors locked. As I pulled up, I saw an old beat-up RV parked next to an even more beat-up pickup truck, which was filled with garbage in the bed. The truck was facing the fence and the back towards the parking row where I was. The guy was standing near the front of the truck waving jumper cables and signaling me to pull closer. The way the truck and RV were positioned, there was barely enough space for a car to squeeze between them. Suddenly, a woman stepped out of the RV and began signaling for me to pull up as well. At this point, I was completely suspicious and freaked out. I shouted out the window, "No, I'm not pulling in there. If the cables can't reach, you'll have to find someone else." She got angry and started screaming at me to pull up, and then the guy ran over to her, yelling at her to shut up and get back inside the RV. He then walked over to the driver's side of my car and said, "Just pull up closer to the truck and I can hook up the cables and we'll be done." By that point, everything about the situation felt off, and I said, "No, I'm not going to be able to help with this." He gave me an irrational look and said, "Seriously? I've got to get to my mother's house. She's not feeling well, you know?" I replied, "I need to go," and I started backing out of the parking area to leave the station. As I was pulling away, I saw the woman come back out of the RV and start shouting at the man pointing towards my car. I couldn't tell what she was saying, but I got out of there quickly and I found another location closer to the city to spend the rest of the night. I don't know if they genuinely needed help or if it was a setup for something more dangerous, but I immediately regretted the decision I made. Also, I don't know why they couldn't just jump the truck using the RV. It was clear the situation could have taken a very bad turn. This happened to me in my 20s about 5 or 6 years ago. I went out for dinner with a friend and had left my car at her condo since we carpooled. When we returned to the condo, we parted ways, so she went to her unit and I walked to my car parked outside. It was around 11 p.m. and there were lots of lights around, but I still took precaution considering that it wasn't the best part of town. No one else was outside, no cars leaving or coming in. I got in my car and proceeded to drive on my way home as normal. I pulled up to a red light and a white SUV pulled up beside me. I absent-mindedly looked around and then looked to my right and made eye contact with the driver. I'm not sure how long he was staring for, but it was creepy. I suddenly got a cold sweat feeling. I proceeded to drive down the long street and his car was always beside mine. I noticed that he was matching my speed and trying to look over at me. I ignored it. This went on for 15 minutes down the same street. My house was another 15 minutes away. There were other cars, but they mostly turned onto smaller streets. This was typically a busy street, but not at this time. I was nervous the whole time, so I texted my friend and my boyfriend letting them know what was happening, but I was fine for now. At one point, the street became one lane because of the cars parked on the right side overnight, so the SUV ended up behind me the whole way. I finally made a turn to another main street where there was more traffic. Somehow he kept up and was pretty much tailing me. I called my boyfriend, freaking out and almost crying at this point. He told me to stay calm and to try to turn onto another major street, not a small one in case anything happened. We hit an area with construction workers working on the road, so 2 lanes were closing. I was in the far left lane, and he pulled up to the pylons to my right and rolled down his window. I'm pretty sure he was shouting at me at this point, and his lips were moving, but I don't know what he said. He pointed at me to roll down the window. He looked angry and a little deranged. I sped off as soon as the light changed, but he was stuck in that lane because there was no one letting him through to avoid the construction. I was able to get home safely, and my boyfriend met up with me in the garage. I was shaken, but thankfully it never happened again. Back when I was 16 years old, I was learning how to drive a car. At this point, I was in high school and living with my parents. I had not got my driver's license yet, but I had my learner's permit and I would be taking the driving test in a few months. For the time period that I had my permit, I would practice driving a lot. At first, I would go out with my parents and practice, or other times I had classes with a driving instructor. The neighborhood that we lived in was pretty quiet. If you went off my street and drove a little ways, there was this really quiet street that hardly anybody knew about. The entrance kind of looked like it was going into the woods, but the road used to connect with another neighborhood. I don't know the whole story, but it was kind of strange. However, years earlier they closed it off, so now the road was basically just a loop. It was probably a half-mile in total, and it was just a looping road that went back around to where it started. It was partly surrounded by woods, and there were no houses on that road or any businesses or anything. Nobody ever drove on it because there was really no point. So this was a great place to practice driving because nobody ever bothered you, and my parents would go there with me. Well, one afternoon I got home from school and neither of my parents were home yet. I didn't have any homework and was really in the mood to practice driving. I knew that my parents wouldn't be home until after 5, but I decided to practice driving anyways. So I took the car keys, and even though I wasn't supposed to drive without my parents, I figured it wasn't a big deal. I got in the car and drove off my street and down to the place where I would practice. Overall, my driving skills were pretty good, but I was still learning some stuff. So I drove down the quiet road and then went around the loop. As I was practicing my driving there, it started out going well. But about 10 minutes in, I noticed another car pull onto the drive. This was really strange, because in all my times practicing driving there, I had never seen another car. I also got nervous because I was not that comfortable driving around other cars yet. I kept going pretty slowly, and then the car soon got towards me. It was coming up behind me, and I went to the right side of the road in case it wanted to pass. At first, it did not, but then I slowed down some more, and eventually the car went around me. I saw a man was driving, but couldn't make out much about him. After he drove around me, I figured that he would leave the loop. Maybe he made a wrong turn or something, because there was nothing here. But he did not. He started driving around it again to make another lap. So that's when I decided that I would just leave. I didn't feel comfortable practicing if somebody else was around. I slowly drove around to the end of the loop, and then I stopped to merge back onto the road. The road that I was merging onto was always quiet, but occasionally a car would drive past. I remember that I saw a car in the distance, and I decided to wait for it to be safe. In the time that I was waiting, I looked over and saw the guy driving his car on the loop making his way back around. When the car on the road passed and I finally turned left, I saw in my mirror the guy in his car starting towards me. I got back onto the road and drove down it a short ways until it was my street where I would turn right. As I was on that street, I saw the car leaving the loop and turn left onto the street that I was on behind me. It seemed a little weird, but now that he was gone, I considered going home and then driving back there again. However, after I turned onto my street, I saw the guy in the car get behind me and turn onto my street as well. I didn't recognize him or the car as anybody who lived on our street, and our street was generally very quiet, so this was kind of weird. I just drove down the street slowly until I got to our house, and then I pulled into the driveway and parked the car. The car behind me slowed down and then pulled over on the side of the street right across from our house. I was really creeped out now, because I didn't know who this guy was or why he was seemingly following me home. I quickly went inside and locked the door. The man stayed inside of his car. When I was inside, I felt more safe, but I still didn't know what was going on. Every so often, I went back and looked out the window to see if the guy had left. He was still there every time though, just sitting in his car. I played some video games in the living room to take my mind off things. Then, after almost 2 hours, I checked the window again. He was still there. But then I saw my dad's car driving down the street and starting to pull into the driveway. As soon as my dad turned, the man in his car drove away. After that, he was gone. When my dad got inside, I told him about it, and a short time later when my mom got home, I told her as well. We didn't call the cops or anything though, but we all thought it was very strange. After that, I never saw the guy again. I'm still creeped out by it when I think back to it though. I don't know where that guy came from or what he was doing. This happened a few weeks ago. I went on a road trip to take a friend of mine home to Colorado. She wanted to fly back, but I really wanted to go on a road trip. I live in Ohio, so we had to go through Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, and Kansas. A 22-hour road trip to get there, not including the rest stops. I'd never traveled this far before in a car. I've flown to Florida once or twice, and I didn't see myself getting an opportunity like this in the near future. I drove most of the way because, well, I love to drive. The person I was taking home said if we needed to switch, it wouldn't be a big deal. At this point, I had been behind the wheel for nearly 12 hours, and maybe it was because I was tired, but the creepiest thing happened. I needed gas, and there was this station closed, so it was dark aside from the lights from the pump and the street light at the gas station. I was creeped out, but I also wasn't concerned because I hadn't had any problems beforehand. Now, this gas station was different than what I was used to. To get gas, you do the usual, select the type of gas you want, but as soon as you pull the nozzle from the pump and into your car, then you had to pull a lever before you could pump the gas. It took me a while of fidgeting to realize this, but right as I did, I heard a voice call out from beside the closed building of the gas station. I don't remember what exactly it said, but if I had to guess, it was a "hey" or a "over here" from a male voice. When I set the pump to where I didn't have to hold the trigger, I looked up and saw nothing there. Again though, I was tired, so I didn't pay any attention to it. This was a deserted gas station. But about halfway through my gas being done, I heard it again. Another male voice called out to me. Maybe he thought I was alone because my roommate was sleeping with the front seat laid all the way down. I didn't feel like leaving the gas station mid-pump and having to stop again somewhere else, so I ignored it and kept pumping while looking at my phone. Next, I heard the man whistling for me like I was a dog, and the absolute worst feeling came over me. Something I have genuinely never felt before. It was a strong feeling of fear. I looked up, and sure enough, there was a man. He was dressed in a brown coat with the hood up and red shorts. After I looked up, he let out a yell and said, "Hey, look at me when I'm talking to you." It was so loud that my friend laying in the front seat shot up and rolled her window down to check on me. At that point, the man was speed walking over towards me. But it was like as soon as my friend made herself known, he turned himself around and booked it away from me to the back of the building. I heard a car start and gravel fly as he got out of there. I didn't get a great look at the car or van because it was dark and I admittedly was stuck in my place. I know a lot of people try to plan for this type of stuff, especially women like me. They have a fully thought out idea of how to handle it just like I did. But when it happened, I was clueless and stuck in fear. I'm glad my roommate let her presence be known when she did, and I'm glad I wasn't alone. After I filled up the car, she took over driving for me and I got some much needed sleep. I don't know what that man wanted or why he was yelling at me or even walked towards me, but I don't ever want to experience something like that again. I was on a road trip a few years ago going back home from college. I had gone to a university that was a 10-hour drive from home. When I was done with school, I packed up my car and was on the way back. I never really brought that much stuff, but my car still had a lot in it. I drove this old car that was kind of in bad shape. It had a lot of miles on it and often had problems. But I was in college and didn't really have that much money, so I had put off getting it fixed. Also because of not having much money, I was planning on driving home all in one day and not stopping at any hotels. After driving all day, I found myself only about 2 hours from home, but driving on some really quiet highway. There were mostly woods on both sides of the road, and things were very quiet as it was now 10 p.m. I was not that tired yet and was used to staying up late from being in college and stuff. So I continued with my driving and was just happy that I was almost back home. But then the engine started sounding real bad and my car ended up breaking down on the side of the road. My car came rolling to a stop and I didn't know what to do. There were really no other cars on the road. I took out my phone but wasn't getting a signal. This made things go from bad to worse. Now I really didn't know what I should do. I had no idea exactly where I was. I knew the general area but did not know if there were any gas stations or stores nearby. I hadn't seen any signs, and as I was looking around, I didn't see any lights off in the distance or anything like that. Nothing indicating that there were businesses up ahead. I thought about getting out and walking, but who knows how long that would take. As I sat there, I was trying to get my phone to work. I didn't know another option. I knew that my car had problems, but I didn't know enough to try to fix it. There was no use in messing around with the engine or anything. If I did, I would probably just make things worse. After maybe 10 minutes of trying my phone, I figured that my best bet was to get out and walk. I couldn't think of anything else to do. Every minute or two, a car would drive by, but nobody stopped to help me. And I was not mad about that, because who knows who would be out driving on the roads late at night. It could be some creep or weirdo. Still, I was kind of nervous to get out of my car. It was so dark and quiet outside, and I didn't know how long I would have to walk for. I was nervous about people, but I was also nervous about animals as the woods was dense and there was lots of wildlife in the area. Then, just before I was about to go outside, I heard a knock at the back window of my car. It startled me and I'm sure that I jumped. When I looked back, I saw some guy standing by my rear passenger side window knocking on the window. I remember that the guy was balding and I had no idea where he had come from. It looked like he had just come straight out of the woods. He also had a bit of a beard and there was no car on the road behind me. Right next to me was a ditch to the right, and then the thick forest. I was not aware of anybody's property or anything like that either being nearby. I looked back to the man who now saw me, but he didn't say anything. He was just standing there. I didn't know what to do. I waved at him, but the guy didn't wave back or say anything. Then he tried opening the back door, which was locked. The guy then walked around my car to the passenger side and then around to the front of my car. During the whole time, he did not say anything at all. Then he arrived at my driver's side door and tried opening that. Then the guy started knocking at the window when the door didn't open because of it being locked, all the while not saying a word. I was so creeped out that I did the only thing I could think to do. I tried starting my car again, and miraculously, it started. I hit the gas and drove away from there. The man was left standing there on the side of the road. I got back onto the highway, and thankfully my car was able to make it all the way back home. After that, I took it to a shop and got it fixed, because I wasn't taking any more chances after that experience. Looking back, I think the guy came from the woods. I don't know where else he came from. What he was doing in there, I don't know, but I'm really glad that I got away from him. My company used to have another office in another state that was 2 states over. Most of the time I flew there, but sometimes we would have equipment or vehicles that needed to be delivered. On those cases, I volunteered to make the trip and would stay at the other office for a week at a time. Sometimes I would take a rest stop at a motel, and sometimes I would break up the drive by pulling over to a rest stop and sleeping in the back of the vehicle for a bit. One time I was driving a big box truck, like a big truck you would rent at U-Haul. We bought the truck used, and the back of the truck was filled with equipment and stuff from that office. I offered to make the trip. Unfortunately, the morning I was scheduled to take off, there was a delay for something I needed to take in that truck. I think it was a large copy machine, and it didn't arrive until almost 3 p.m. After loading it in the truck and getting ready to take off, I knew I was going to hit rush hour traffic, so I opted to delay my leave for 2 hours so I wouldn't leave until after 5 p.m. Even though there was still lots of traffic, it would only be local in the vicinity, and once I got out in the open, it was pretty much a straight shot until I reached the state line. Having to pull over a couple of times for fuel and restroom breaks, I got into a rural area north of my state after midnight. I pulled over one last time that night for fuel and coffee. The next stretch was going to be very dark and desolate, so I was preparing myself. I knew there was one more rest stop near the border, so I pulled over there to use the restroom, stretch my legs, and rest for a few minutes before moving on. When I pulled up to the rest stop, it was empty. It was somewhat well lit, and I am and was in pretty good shape, so I wasn't worried too much about my safety as I used to box. I went to the restroom and washed up a bit, but when I made it back to my truck, There was a pickup truck next to my truck and a guy standing next to my truck as well. He started to make small talk, and then he asked me if I was having any mechanical problems with my truck. I thought it was odd that he asked me that. I got back in my truck and took off. After this point, there's a long stretch that's mostly forest area, and it's kinda creepy to drive through it at 3 a.m. Having driven this route before, I knew there was a bridge up ahead. Suddenly, all the lights in my truck turned off. Headlights, instrument lights, even the running lights. I tapped on the brakes and looked behind me. Even the brake lights seemed to be out. Thankfully, it was a moonlit night, enough to be able to gauge what was ahead of me. I was more angry than panicked, so I slammed my fist on the dashboard and yelled. I guess that was the right move, because after I slammed the dashboard, suddenly everything came back up again. The lights were all fine. I drove looking for somewhere to stop, like a gas station, motel, shopping center, anything. I remembered a gas station I had stopped at another time, which was in a city about 10 miles up the road. I made it to that gas station and noticed that shortly after I pulled in, the same pickup truck with the same guy pulled over. He didn't pull up to the gas pumps and stayed in the street. But suddenly, I got this chilled feeling like this guy did something to my truck while I was inside the rest stop earlier. I started to put some fuel in the truck, thinking about my next move. Then, just as I was about to get back in my truck, a cop car pulled into the station and I waved it down. I got out and made some small talk to the cop and pointed in the direction of the street where the pickup driver was pulled over. After I did that, the truck drove off. I think I asked the police about the road conditions and asked them if there was a motel or something ahead. When I got back in my truck, I decided that if the guy had done something that might disable my truck, I better pull off for the night. I kept looking behind me to see if the truck was following me. I think it was, but I couldn't be sure. I made it to another town a little bit larger than the last one I had left, and there was a motel. I checked in, locked my truck, grabbed my bag, and kept looking around, expecting something to pop out. I didn't sleep well that night, but nothing out of the normal happened. In the light of day, I eventually made it to the office, and I asked them to have the truck looked at by a mechanic. I told them the issue, and they reported back to me after I was home that the mechanic had found nothing wrong, and they didn't experience the same issue while driving it back. Maybe the mechanic overlooked something. That man gave me the creeps though, and I'm positive that he did something to my truck and was following me. Maybe he would have made his move if I ever pulled over on the highway to address the issue. This happened pretty recently, actually. I was driving on a large highway outside of Miami, Florida. I live in the area, and if you've been down here, you know that there's a lot of traffic and a lot of really nice cars. So I was going southbound back home from work. I often work pretty late nights. The bright side of this is that the roads are much more clear at that hour, but that doesn't mean they're empty. There's still a lot of people driving around. I drive a pretty average-looking car myself. It's just a Toyota that's about 10 years old. Nothing flashy, but it's very reliable. So anyways, as I was driving, I happened to see a car coming up real fast a long ways behind me. It looked to be a pretty fancy car. It looked like an Audi R8 or something along those lines. I was going about 70 miles per hour, and this thing had to be doing well over 100. It came up so quick, and I saw it weave in and out of traffic. This is not uncommon around here, and I see someone driving like that all the time late at night. So I stayed in my lane, and they blew past me very quickly and went out of my sight up the road ahead. I didn't really give it that much thought even. I just continued with my drive back home. I was excited to go to bed after a long day. However, it was like 2 or 3 minutes later. I was still traveling on the same highway, and I saw the same fast car up ahead. It was pulled over on the right side of the road. I didn't know which car it was at first, but then I realized the car and I was confused. It was the one that I had just seen pass me minutes earlier going really fast. There was no cop behind it, so the car had not been pulled over. Perhaps it had broken down or something. I kept going and soon made it past the car. However, when I did, I saw the car pull back onto the highway very suddenly. It then sped up really fast and got right behind me. I moved over to the right a lane to get out of the car's way. I didn't know who was driving this car because it was nighttime and the windows of it were also super tinted. The highway had like 5 lanes, so they could have easily gone around me. Instead, this car then moved into the lane that I was in and continued following me. It seemed like they were intentionally following me now. I had no idea why this car would follow me though. I kept driving all the way in the most right lane there was. The car remained behind me. After like 5 minutes of this, I was getting paranoid. I took the next exit even though it wasn't mine. When I took the exit, to my surprise, the car behind me did not. It stayed on the highway and kept going. I felt a ton of relief as I now drove down a road that I was not supposed to be on. I went a ways down and then took my time merging back onto the highway. When I got back on it, I continued with my drive home. I was only on the highway for like another minute when I noticed another nice car behind me. It was a ways back and looked like it was going pretty fast. This one looked like a Nissan GTR, blue in color. The car quickly got up behind me and then did not pass. It just started following me like the car before. I didn't know what to make of this. My exit was coming up, and I kept driving down the highway with the car following me until I got there. Then I took the exit, hoping that like the last car, it would remain on the highway. But it did not. The nice car took the exit with me. I was paranoid now. I started driving home on the quieter streets. It was less than 10 minutes away. Each turn that I made, the car behind me did as well. Until randomly, it stopped. It just took a different turn than I did, and I was only a few streets away from my neighborhood. I felt much better and drove the rest of the way looking behind me for the car every 2 seconds. I ended up making it back to my place okay and didn't see the car anymore. I haven't had anything crazy like that happen since, but I'm still so confused about it. What was going on there and why were those nice cars following me? I don't even know anyone who drives a nice car like that. And like I said, my car is nothing special. It remains a mystery to me. If anybody thinks they know, please let me know about it. One night when I was 19 years old, I was driving back home from work late at night. It was around 11 p.m., and I was on this stretch of 2-lane highway that I drive every time I go to and from work. At the particular moment, it was really dark outside. There were no other cars around me, either passing the other way or approaching from behind. The highway didn't have any sort of streetlights, and even the moon wasn't that bright that night. The only light for my eyes was my headlights cutting through the darkness. I had actually a good night of work that night for whatever reason, so I was in a good mood for the drive home, listening to music and just basically daydreaming about stuff. I wasn't paying much attention to my surroundings, and out of nowhere, I saw a flash of red appear to the right side of my car. Before I could even react and slam on the brakes, this guy in a red shirt on a bicycle swerved from the side of the road right in front of my car. I hit him directly and felt the impact on the hood of my car. I was yelling out loud and freaking out the whole time as I slowed down and pulled over. I had been going somewhere between 50 to 60 miles per hour, and I felt like I had to have killed the guy. It would be a miracle if I somehow didn't. I got out of the car and ran back down the road to see how badly he was hurt. The only thing is, I didn't see him. I couldn't find the guy, his bike, his red shirt, or anything that seemed like it belonged to a biker scattered on the side of the road. I began searching the ditch on the side of the road with a flashlight, hoping to find him alive. Maybe I had just clipped him. A couple of people passed by slowly on the road while I was looking in the field for a body, and eventually a sheriff's car pulled up behind me. I told him what happened and how this guy just came out of nowhere. Before I could finish my continued rambling and crying at this point, the sheriff calmed me down and told me that I didn't hit anyone. The sheriff continued on to tell me that about 15 years ago, a young man in a red shirt was hit by a car while riding his bike right there on the spot on this highway. He died instantly, and the sheriff said that every couple years they get a call about someone driving on the highway who believes they've hit a red-shirted biker. It was the most relieving thing in my life to hear that I had hit a ghost. It had felt so real though. I felt an impact when I collided with it, but sure enough, when I got back to my car, there was no dent, scratches, or blood on my hood. I still drive on that road to and from work every day, and I now just instinctively slow down on that part of the highway, wondering if I will ever see the ghost bike rider again. The sheriff said that the station only received calls about the paranormal accident once in a rare while, and I wonder if it was a sign for me to slow down or be more observant when I'm driving. I had a really crazy thing that happened several years ago. For some background, I'm a woman and at the time of this story lived alone in an apartment building. I had lived there for a while and I worked a job about 15 minutes away. Overall, the area was pretty busy, but right where my apartment was, it was a little quieter. My apartment had 3 buildings all connected to each other and then a large parking lot. One time, as I was driving to work in the morning, my cell phone started ringing. I didn't know who it was, and I did not answer. But the next day, when I was on my way to work, I got a call again. I ignored this one too. However, that night, I left my apartment to go to the store. When I was driving, I got a phone call again from the same number. This time, I was curious, so I answered. I said hello, but got no response. Then it sounded like I could hear breathing on the other end. However, it abruptly stopped as whoever was on the other end hung up on me. I was very confused, but figured that it was a wrong number. Whoever had called me probably thought that I was somebody else, and once they heard me talk, they realized that it was wrong. That's what was going through my head. However, the next day when I was driving to work, they called me again. Right away, I picked up and said, "Why do you keep calling me?" On the other end, at first, there was nothing. I was about to hang up when someone suddenly spoke. There was a man's voice who said, "Who are you?" I said, "You're the one who keeps calling me. Who are you?" Then the guy hung up on me again. I was frustrated. I didn't know if this was some kind of a mistake or joke or what. It was overall very strange. When I was driving back from work that day, he called again. When I picked up, he asked me where I was going. I was creeped out and I hung up on him. I blocked the number and thought that would be the end of it, but I was still trying to figure out what was going on. It was very strange because I would only get calls from this guy when I was driving, never any other time. I didn't know how he got my number or anything either. I figured though, since I blocked the number, that I would not receive another call from him, but I was wrong. The very next day, again as I was driving to work, I got a call. It was from a different number now, but when I answered it, it was the same guy. He asked me again where I was going. I asked him again who he was. Then he was just breathing on the other end before he randomly hung up. I was very creeped out by this. For most of the rest of the day, nothing happened. But that night, after I had been back home, I left to go out a little bit later at night. I was driving out of my apartment complex when I noticed something interesting. There was a car backed into a parking space in the far corner of the parking lot near the exit. I don't know if it was because it was quieter at this time of night or what, but I noticed that there was a man sitting in the car and he was wearing sunglasses and watching me as I drove. Wearing sunglasses at night is strange enough. As I left, the guy continued to watch me though. For some reason, it just struck me as suspicious. I had never noticed him before though. Then, about 2 minutes later as I was driving, I got another call. It was the same guy. I asked what he wanted. Once more, he asked me where I was going. Then I said, "I saw you sitting in the parking lot." The guy said nothing, but then hung up on me a few seconds later. This was not different from what he would normally do. I really wasn't 100% sure that it was him sitting in the parking lot. However, after that, he never called again. And I never saw that guy in the parking lot either. So that must have been him sitting in the car. He might have been sitting there every time when I left, and that's why he always called me when I was driving. I didn't recognize him at all and didn't know who he was though. I don't know why he decided to keep calling me or what his plan was, and I also don't know how he got my number. So one night, quite a while back, I drove onto a 2-lane highway with both lanes going the same way. It was very late at night, maybe early morning, as I was driving home after my late night shift, so the road was totally empty. I made my way onto this road and eventually caught up to a car ahead of me. It was going incredibly slow, so I moved into the other lane to overtake it, all the while going about the speed limit. While still in the process of overtaking this car, it suddenly sped up to the same speed as me, holding the same speed the entire time. At first, I figured maybe they'd kind of gone into a trance while driving and not really noticed how slow they were going. But they kept going the same speed as me for a long time, therefore I couldn't pull back into the original lane on the right. Glancing over very quickly, so quickly that they definitely didn't see me looking, I saw there were 2 young males in the car, young enough that I'm not even sure they were legal to be driving. I don't mean to stereotype, but this did freak me out, as I'd heard horror stories about young men driving together causing accidents. Anyways, at this point I was just annoyed, so I slowed down significantly to get them away from me so then I could pull back in behind them. I basically halved my speed at that point, and they did the same, keeping the same speed as me. I could just tell they were looking at me, and they were gesturing as well. I could see out of the corner of my eye, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of looking over at them. In fact, during this entire encounter, I didn't look over at them once. I then decided to speed up quickly in the hopes of getting ahead of them instead. Again, they sped up too, keeping the same speed as me. This was really starting to freak me out, as if I didn't get back into the lane that they were in, I couldn't even exit the road and find a gas station or something to wait for them to leave. so I just decided to go at the speed I felt safe at, with keeping them beside me the whole time. Eventually, another car came up behind us, which seemed to force the original car to speed off into the distance. I never saw that car again, nor have I ever encountered a similar issue. I think they were just two guys who enjoyed speeding about in their car while the roads were empty, and while not realizing how slow they were going, got annoyed that somebody had managed to overtake them and wanted me to race them or something. Nonetheless, it was pretty scary, and I've always been very careful when driving late at night since. Two years ago, I took a road trip to Dallas, Texas. It was a long drive, and I planned to do as much as I could each day. One night, I was driving, and it got to be really late. I was tired, but I knew I could keep going. I just needed a quick pit stop. I had literally no idea where I was. The only thing I knew at that particular time was that I was on some random highway in either Arkansas or Oklahoma. It was a little after midnight, and the roads were very quiet. I started looking around for a city or a place to stop. I was sleepy and also had to use the restroom. I had nothing left to drink and was out of snacks, but I knew if I could get some caffeine, I could drive for several more hours. Finally, after driving for like 10 more minutes, I saw a sign for a rest area up ahead. When it came up, I took the exit to the right and entered it. The rest area was very quiet and small. There was no other roads connecting to it. The rest area was just directly off the highway, and then the only option was to get back onto it. As for the rest area itself, it was just one long parking lot and then a small building. Surrounding it was a grass area and then lots of woods. There was also a wooded area between the rest area and the highway, so you couldn't see it from the road. I pulled into a parking space right in front of the building. I thought that this rest area looked pretty sketchy. It had just a few dimly lit streetlights going along the parking lot, and then one other one next to the building. The building also looked old and outdated. I considered just moving along and trying to make it to a town for another stop, but I thought about the drive. For like the last hour, I hadn't really come across any cities or much else. There was no telling how much farther I would have to drive before reaching something, plus the cell phone signal around there was spotty at best. And I knew that I needed something to drink, and this place probably had a vending machine at the very least. I looked around and saw that no other cars were in the parking lot at all. I didn't know whether to feel good or bad about this observation. On one hand, it was nice to have the place to myself and nobody else around, but on the other hand, it felt more creepy this way. As a smaller woman traveling alone, I was always trying to keep my guard up a little at night. I sat in my parked car and looked around. I didn't hear or see anything at all. I decided that it should be fine. I took my pepper spray just in case. So I got out of my car and then walked up the sidewalk into the building. I felt creeped out, but told myself not to be a wimp and there was nothing to be afraid of. After making it inside the building, there really wasn't much in there. The men's restroom was to one side and the women's to the other. Then there was a small lobby with a couple of vending machines and a few benches. I went in the restroom and was in there for maybe a minute. As I was washing my hands, I thought I heard footsteps inside the lobby. I realized that somebody else must have got there. I heard the footsteps go closer to the women's restroom that I was in, but the door did not open. The footsteps stopped right outside of it. Then someone started banging on the door very loudly. This was strange because the bathroom door did not lock. It was a bathroom where there were several stalls and sinks inside of it, so the door just swung open and could not be locked at all. I thought they would enter, but instead they just banged on it very loudly. I was very confused. For some reason, I didn't say anything though. The banging went on for maybe 30 seconds and it was really strange. Finally, it stopped. Then I heard footsteps walking away, and based on the footsteps, I guessed that it was a man. I'm not an expert, but they were louder and heavier and almost like work boots. I sort of heard the door open and realized that whoever was there was leaving. I was pretty creeped out by the whole thing. So I waited in the bathroom for about another minute and then left. I walked out of the bathroom with my pepper spray in hand. I looked around but didn't see anybody. When I left the rest area building and got back out into the parking lot, only my car was there. It was strange because I hadn't heard another car come or go. Even though I was in the building, I thought I would have heard that. Nevertheless, I walked out to my car and got back inside. I realized that I hadn't even gotten anything to drink or eat, but I felt that I no longer needed an energy drink. I was wide awake. Plus, I just wanted to get out of there at this point. I started my engine and began driving out of there. Now, the rest area parking lot narrowed at the end to a one-lane road. This went between the wooded area on both sides and then merged directly back onto the highway. As I was going to the end of the parking area and the road started narrowing, I suddenly saw something up ahead. I continued to drive, but then saw a man come out of the woods and go right onto the road in front of me. He was a good 50 feet ahead, but I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting him. The man had sort of long hair and a beard and was wearing a brown jacket, jeans, and what looked like work boots. Could this have been the man who was banging on the door? He stopped right in the middle of the road and now stood there, completely blocking my way. I stopped on the road and he just looked at me facing my direction. We were just staring at each other for what felt like a long time. It was probably about 30 seconds. I wanted to go around him, but there just wasn't enough space. The man started walking towards my car. I put it into reverse and began backing up. He didn't say anything or make any motions to me. He didn't wave or ask me to go around him or anything. As I backed up, he started walking faster. I realized that he was coming after me and I hit the gas harder. As I reversed more, the man started to run after me. I backed up all the way until I was in the parking lot. Then I turned the car around and started driving away. The man stood there back towards the end of the lot. If I wanted to leave, I would have to go past him. But then I decided to just go out the wrong way. I drove to the entrance and went along the one-way road there, going the wrong direction. If anybody had tried to enter the rest area from the highway in that moment, I would have possibly hit them head on. Thankfully, nobody was. I made it to the entrance and then did a sharp right turn and merged back onto the highway from there. Nobody else was on the highway at the time. Then I drove past the rest area. When I passed by where the rest area merged back onto the highway, as I was getting up to speed still, I saw the man again. He was standing on the side of the road just past the rest area exit, looking at me. I was so creeped out. I drove a ways and then called 911 and reported the guy. I was told that a police officer would go to the rest area and check it out. I never heard anything more. Looking back, I'm still wondering who that guy was and what he was doing. He definitely seemed to be up to no good. With just him and I alone in the rest area that night, it was a very creepy encounter. I live in a super residential suburban area a little east of Buffalo, New York. I was driving home one night about 1 a.m. and was on my street, which is only a bunch of ranch houses and no other buildings. I was about 8 houses down from my driveway. I go slow because people in my neighborhood leave out food for deer, and I know the one day I go the speed limit I'm going to hit one. On the side of the road to my left, the driver's side, I saw something lying right at the side of the road. It wasn't a garbage night, and anyways, we have these big cans provided by the city. I slowed down. At that point, I was maybe 8 feet away, and I was shocked because it looked like a person laying there. I turned on my high beams and put my hand on the door handle, about to open it to go investigate. In the darkness, with the headlights, I couldn't make out a ton of detail, but it was a person laying there for sure. I saw what looked like a white shirt with what seemed like red on it. I started to open the door when I got this feeling that I just have not encountered before. Instead, I decided that I would go home first and then come back out to help them out. I sat back, grabbed my phone, and floored it to my driveway, which was 10 seconds away anyways. I was standing in the driveway with 911 being dialed on my phone and walking towards the sidewalk in the direction where I saw the person. As I was walking towards them though, they stood up and turned to face me. I was being transferred to a dispatcher at the moment, and I had only walked about 2 houses down towards this person. The dispatcher came on the line as soon as this person began sprinting in my direction on the other side of the street from me. I stated my location and what was happening, all while I was running back towards my house. I didn't like the idea of not seeing what this person was doing though, so I turned to watching them while also trying to run and kind of skip backwards away from them. From my driveway, I saw this person stop running. They had run maybe 3 houses towards me, staggered around in circles, and stumbled across the street, but they didn't stop on the sidewalk. Then they just walked into a random yard. From there, it was hard to see exactly which yard they had gone into. I explained this all to the dispatcher and that I didn't know which house, and I didn't know if they were going home, breaking in, cutting through a yard, or what. Dispatch told me somebody was being sent immediately. When an officer came slowly down the street with his high beams on, I signaled for them and they pulled up, thinking I was the person reported. I explained that I was the one who witnessed the situation and explained where I saw the person go. He seemed to treat it as a prank at first until I told him the direction I saw the person go. That seemed to change his attitude, and then he sped off. I live a few blocks from a large apartment complex that deals in some shenanigans at times, and he went off in that direction. I never figured out what happened, but it scared me more than any other situation I've been in. About 8 years ago now, I was driving across the Colorado and New Mexico border at around 4 a.m. I needed gas if I was going to make it through the rest of the morning. I was looking for a stop to fill up, but there wasn't much and a couple of other places were closed. I happened to come across a tiny little farm town with not much at all. They did have a little gas station, and it might be the only place I find for miles, so I decided to stop and fill up there. I hadn't seen another car for hours, and it was freezing cold outside, so I didn't expect to see anybody else there at the gas station. As far as I could tell, the town felt abandoned. It was that quiet outside. It was a surreal feeling, honestly, except for the fact that it was cold outside. I started pumping my gas, certain that I was completely alone, until I noticed another car in the shadows near the back of the building. It was a nice-looking black lowrider with completely tinted windows. I noticed 4 very gangster-looking Latino guys leaning against it. I remember laughing out loud a bit at first, not just because I had no idea they were there, but also because they were wearing all black shorts, wife-beater tank tops, and knee-high socks. It was just a funny picture because of their outfits and how cold it was outside. They were just posted up against their car in the middle of nowhere at 4 a.m. looking so casual. Suddenly, without a word, all 4 of them got off the car and walked straight towards me. Now, under the lights of the gas station, I could see the full sleeves and face tattoos and realized that I probably shouldn't have laughed. Dropping the gas pump, I quickly got into my car and accelerated the quickest I probably ever have out of that gas station. Less than 30 seconds after I pulled out onto the highway, I saw headlights swerve out and follow me. Thankfully, I had some upgrades on my car and engine, and after a few miles, I was able to lose them as their headlights disappeared in my rearview mirror. I didn't think much of it, and even laughed at how bad I outran them, until a cop buddy of mine told me about the Mexican cartels running drugs through there to avoid the interstate. I'm guessing they would have left me alone if I never saw them in the shadows by the gas station or acknowledged them, but it was still a scary situation in the middle of nowhere that late at night. This happened in February 2016 when I was 23 years old. I was living in northern New Mexico at the time and had driven up to Boulder, Colorado to visit a friend for the weekend. I had taken this route several times before, so I was comfortable driving the long distance alone. The trip home was uneventful until I stopped for gas in Alamosa, Colorado. This was the last real big town before home, about 90 miles to go with not a whole lot in between, except for a few tiny rural communities and desolate desert landscape. It was around 6 p.m. and starting to get dark outside. As I pulled out of the gas station, I noticed a dark blue sedan pull out behind me and turn onto the same highway that I was getting on. I didn't think anything of it until the car started tailgating me. I was really confused because they could have easily passed me if I was driving too slow, since there were hardly any other cars on the road. When I sped up, they did too. When I slowed down, so did they. No matter what speed I drove at, the car stayed right behind me. I assumed it was a cop waiting for me to make a mistake to pull me over, but it never did. I was starting to get uncomfortable, so in the next little small town community I saw, I pulled over onto the side of a convenience store. I thought to myself that if this was a cop, they would surely get out and talk to me. They pulled up right behind me, but nobody got out of the car. I parked and waited for several minutes before driving off, with the car still following close behind. As soon as I crossed the state line into New Mexico, I knew that this was for sure not a cop. My heart sank as I drove deeper and deeper into the dark mesa. I didn't have a real phone at the time, just an old iPhone that could connect to Wi-Fi, so there was no way for me to let anybody know what was happening. It's also important to mention that this was a particularly sketchy area. A lot of eerie and sometimes downright frightening stuff happens out on the Taos Mesa, which is what I was driving through. I was so distraught over why this person was still tailgating me that I drove right past the last turn onto the long dirt road that would have taken me home. Thankfully, just down the highway there was a popular and well-lit scenic rest area I could turn around at. The sedan, of course, pulled in right behind me. But this time, feeling brave and stupid, I decided to confront them. Behind the wheel was a totally normal-looking middle-aged woman. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't that. The back seat was too dark to tell if anybody was sitting back there. I asked her what her problem was, and she apologized, saying that she thought this was her daughter's car. This made no sense because my car had a completely different state's plate than her car and was also covered in unique bumper stickers. There was no way it could have been confused for anybody else's car. Also, why would she not have just called her daughter instead of following me for close to 90 miles? And that was when I had stopped for the first time and didn't get out of the car. It made no sense. I told her off and she apologized again. When I got back onto the highway and turned onto my dirt dead-end road, she turned in too. I immediately pulled over and yelled at her to stop following me, and there was no way out to the highway from this road. She apologized again, but when I got back in my car and started driving, she kept on following me. Thankfully, I was close enough to home and knew my boyfriend was there waiting for me. She pulled into my driveway with me, this time getting out of her car, and asked if she could please stay the night. She said that she was so tired and to please let her in. I was screaming at her to leave when my boyfriend came outside hearing the commotion. Literally the moment she saw him, she ran back into her car and sped off. The whole ordeal was so freaky, and to this day I have no idea what she really wanted or why she chose to follow my car for such a far distance. I had a pretty creepy experience when I took a road trip last summer with my girlfriend. We both had a little bit of time off work as we're both teachers. We love to travel and explore the country by driving around. That way we can stop at lots of cool places along the way. So we were going on a road trip to visit a couple of cities that we had never been to before. It was a fun time, and on the way back we were taking turns driving as we had before. I was doing most of the driving, probably like 70% of it, and my girlfriend would get a few hours of driving in here and there when I got tired. At one point we stopped at this truck stop gas station area for a rest. We had to get gas, and we both needed to use the restroom anyways. It was pretty large, and there was a ton of trucks on one end and then cars on the other. There was a store with showers and lots of food and stuff for sale inside. We stopped there at like 8 p.m. and it was decently busy. My girlfriend and I split up. I fueled the car and she went ahead and went inside of the store. Then when I was done fueling, I parked the car in another spot. I went inside and used the restroom, but then just went straight back to the car. My girlfriend was still inside getting snacks. A few minutes later, she came back and we left. Now, I believe that when we left that place, a truck started following us. It was an average-looking pickup truck, sort of old. I didn't really pay much attention right away. When we got back out on the highway as well, there was a decent amount of other cars around. But I just know that when it quieted down about an hour later, I remember seeing this truck behind us. I knew that it had been there for a while, but I hadn't been paying attention to exactly when. I just remember changing lanes to pass a car, and the truck did the same thing. This was not strange, but when I put my car on cruise control when I got back in the right lane, I decided to just cruise there. I was having a snack of corn nuts that my girlfriend got me, and when eating and driving at the same time, I don't feel like passing people. I usually just cruise, so I was going at about 5 over the limit, and even though there weren't that many cars around, eventually some passed me. But this truck never did. It got closer to us and was not quite tailgating, but was following pretty close. It stayed in the right lane just behind me. I kept thinking that he would pass me as others were, but he never did. Eventually, I started to wonder about him. At this point, I was still not that suspicious, but I just found it a bit odd. So I kept going for like another hour with the truck behind me the entire way. Then we ended up losing signal on our cell phones. This happens when traveling across country sometimes. But it was too bad because the maps on our phones both stopped working. Many times, even when the signal is down on my phone, the map will still work. But this time it didn't. We knew that we were supposed to change roads up ahead, but I didn't know which exit it was. After driving for like another 20 minutes, I saw an exit that I thought I was supposed to take. That would connect us with the next highway that we were supposed to drive on. When we took that exit, the truck did as well, which made me suspicious. After taking the exit though, I started to see detour signs. My girlfriend and I were both very confused. We couldn't remember the road number that we were supposed to be on. I thought that it was correct, but I didn't know for sure. So we kept going and followed this detour. But things quickly seemed wrong. This detour took us off one quiet highway and then onto this really quiet and smaller road. That led us to an even smaller one-lane road and then to some random dirt road. Each new road that we were on, we seemed more and more lost. By now, I realized that I needed to turn around, but this truck was still there. I could not tell who was behind the wheel other than the silhouette looked like a man, but it was dark out. Eventually, when we were on this dirt road, I saw that it appeared as though the road was completely blocked up ahead. I didn't know what to do. I pulled over to the side of the road right there. The truck pulled over behind me. For a moment, I considered getting out and asking the guy what he was doing, but I quickly thought better of it. Then I decided to make a U-turn. However, as soon as I started to turn around, the truck turned to the left. I thought that the truck was also making a U-turn, but it stopped when it was completely blocking the road. It just stayed there and didn't move. So at that point, I stopped making a U-turn and turned forward. I drove up towards the sign blocking the road. I didn't know if I would be able to get past the truck as it appeared to be blocking me. I drove to the sign and then decided to go around it. I went slightly off the road and then went around the sign. Past it, the road still seemed fine. I then saw the truck starting to turn and move again. I floored it and went down that dirt road as fast as I could. Then I saw that the road had an intersection up ahead. I went to the left and then continued going faster. I turned again at the next road and then turned my lights off. I literally could barely see, but I carefully kept going and did not see the truck at all in my mirror. I did my best to then backtrack to the general direction of the highway. My girlfriend was trying to get a signal on her phone, but it wouldn't work. Soon enough, I turned my lights back on. We must have been navigating there for about 30 minutes until I miraculously made it back to the highway. Then I was able to finally get back on track and get a signal on my phone. I never saw the truck behind me after that, and my girlfriend and I were able to make it back okay. But I still wonder about that truck. What did that guy want, and what could have happened? I was in the U.S. Air Force stationed in Omaha in the late 1980s. At the time, I hung out with my roommate and another friend, all of us being girls. My name is Tracy, my roommate's name was also Tracy, just spelled differently, and the girl we hung out with was named Stacy. When we were together, everyone always thought that we were lying, and being the silly teenagers we were, we always found it funny. One weekend, we decided to take a road trip to Kansas City, Missouri. We were speeding down the highway, laughing and singing at the top of our lungs. We were happy and having the time of our lives. Stacy was driving, and she had a bit of a lead foot and must have been going too fast, because before long, a state trooper pulled up behind us and turned on his lights. Stacy immediately pulled over. By the time the officer made it to her window, she already had her license and registration in hand and the window down. The officer looked over at her and then looked at Tracy and I. Then he said, "I want you to follow me and don't try to run off or you'll all be going to jail." Then he went back and got into his car. Needless to say, the three of us were puzzled and talked amongst ourselves, wondering why he didn't just take Stacy's identification and write her a ticket. The officer pulled out slowly, and we dropped in behind him and followed him down the road. He drove a few miles and then exited the highway. He drove a little ways and turned onto a dirt road that was surrounded by stalks of corn. We all stopped talking and we became more alarmed. However, we were young and scared, and since he was a police officer, we continued to follow him. The officer drove for some time down this dirt road and then pulled into an area that had a big beat-up old barn. He stopped and we stopped behind him, and a group of men with shotguns exited the barn. It wasn't until that point that we realized we were in mortal danger and panic set in. The officer walked back to our car and told Stacy to get out and follow him to his car. As she got out, she looked at Tracy and I still in the car, and there was sheer terror on her face. She followed him to his car, and he motioned for her to get in on the passenger side, which she did. Tracy and I were still sitting in the car, and the armed men stood on the side of the car looking at us. We began quietly praying to God to protect the three of us, and we prayed that Stacy wasn't being hurt and somehow they would let us leave. After some minutes, Stacy bolted out of the officer's car and ran back to our car and jumped in the driver's seat. She was crying hysterically. The officer got out of his car and walked back to our car, this time to Tracy's window as she was in the front passenger seat. He asked, "Is it true you're all in the Air Force?" Tracy replied, "Yes, sir," and the officer calmly said, "Get out of here and go back to where you all came from, and I better not see you all again." As soon as he finished, Stacy turned on the car, whipped it around, and sped back down the dirt road. She somehow navigated back to the highway. As she drove back towards the base, the silence was only broken by an occasional sob from one of us. Stacy drove for a while, and as soon as we crossed back over into Nebraska, she pulled over on the side of the highway. Then she began to sob heavily. Tracy and I hugged her and asked if she was hurt in any way. She shook her head, indicating no, she was not hurt. After she calmed down enough, she told us what happened in the police car. After she got in the cop car, she offered the officer her identification and she told him that she was sorry for speeding. He took her information and then he asked her, "What are you doing with those two N-words?" Stacy was white and Tracy and I, who had been in the car, were both black. Stacy then explained to the cop that we were on a road trip. He told her that if she would do certain favors for him, he might let us go with a warning. At that point, Stacy had a complete meltdown. I guess while he was waiting for her to calm down, he finally looked at her identification and saw that she had also given him her military ID. He asked her if we were all in the military, and between sobs she said that we were. He asked where we were stationed and then told her to go back to her car. As we sat there after Stacy told us what occurred, I think it hit all three of us at the same time that the only thing that saved us was that we were in the military and stationed at a nearby base. We hugged each other and cried until we could not cry anymore. We didn't report what had happened. Again, we were teenagers and didn't think that we would be believed over a law enforcement officer. We never talked about it after that day. That incident has haunted me for years, especially with all the what-ifs and situations of how it could have ended. But as I get older, what haunts me more is the thought that others may have not have been so lucky as we were dealing with that cop. A few years ago, I got this new car. I really liked it a lot, and I still have it today and love it. It's something that's nicer than anything I've had before, and it's really fun to drive. So after getting the car, I would look for any excuse to drive it around. I started liking to take night drives because I found it relaxing. I live out in the countryside a little bit, so the roads here are nice and windy and nobody else is really out there late. So one night I went out to go for a drive pretty late. I got in my car and left. I would usually drive sort of the same route late at night. I would leave my house, connect to a larger road, and drive down that a few miles, then turn around at this one spot and drive back. It was fun because there were a lot of curves and it went through a lot of wooded areas and stuff. And I just love driving in general, and always have. So I got out onto the roads, and I was doing my usual route. After getting a few miles down the road, out of nowhere I heard this sound. It was like something small hit the passenger side of my car, like maybe a rock. It was quiet, but I was able to hear it fairly well. I thought that maybe I had run over a rock or a few small ones and it had kicked one up or something. But the road that I was on was a nicely paved one. It wasn't like there was a bunch of debris on it regularly. Still, that was the only thing that made sense to me, but it did seem a little strange, because how would that make it hit the passenger side of my car? I shrugged it off though, because the car was still running fine and it didn't seem like a big deal. I mean, I'm out in the countryside, so there's gonna be some sticks and rocks on the ground and stuff. I continued with my drive and turned around at my usual spot and then headed back. Overall, I was having a good time driving my new car. Soon I approached the same spot where I had heard the sound before. Right as I was passing by there, suddenly I sort of saw something out of the corner of my eye, but not well at all. Other than my headlights, there was no light, so I couldn't see too much off my direct path in front of me. But then, the next thing I knew, there was a really loud sound hitting my driver's side. It was literally right on the other side of where I was sitting, and this was much louder than the last one. It was so loud that I knew right then and there that something had been thrown at my car, possibly a rock. I slowed down and then stopped my car on the side of the road right there. After stopping, I got out to assess the damage and look around and find out who on earth had done that. Right when I got out of the car though, I heard something a ways back. I looked and saw this man running full speed at me from a long ways away. He was holding something in his hand, and as he got closer, it appeared to possibly be a hammer. I didn't want to stay there and see what would happen if I let him catch up to me. I quickly got back inside my car and drove away. Then I called the police and reported the man. I don't know if they ever found him. After that night, I stopped driving that route. I tried to look and see who lives in the properties of that area, and I actually met the guy whose property that was on, but it wasn't the same man, and he didn't know who it would be. I had thought that maybe my night drives annoyed someone, even though my car isn't that loud, or maybe it was just someone trying to cause problems. I haven't figured it out though. The damage to my car was not too bad, and I was able to get it fixed, but I'm still looking out for myself every time I drive past that area now. This happened back when I was in college. It's something that was really strange and that I still think about sometimes. I was in graduate school and was living in an apartment that was a little bit off campus. The university that I was studying at is very large and has lots of students. The campus is pretty big as well. One evening, I was in one of the buildings studying and doing work. I was in there for quite a long time and worked well into the night. Finally, when it was sort of late, maybe 10 o'clock at night, I decided to be done. I packed up my stuff and left the building. I drove my car there because my apartment was about 2 miles away from this particular building. Overall, it was maybe a 7-minute drive roughly. So as I was walking to my car, I remember that I saw this guy riding a bike. I remember that he was kind of tall and thin and looked to be in his 40s or so. He was riding casually down a quiet street near the building that I was in. It was pretty common to see people on bikes around campus, and I thought nothing of it. I got to my car and went inside. When I started the engine, I noticed that the biker was kind of circling around and still in the same general area. I went out of the parking lot and was going to make a right. However, I was waiting for the biker to pass by before I did, as he was riding in the same direction. But he then turned around and went back the other way, so I turned right onto the road. As I started driving down the street, the speed limits were like 20 or 25 miles per hour on most of the ones around campus, or something like that. They were really slow. So I was going at a slow speed, and I soon saw the guy on the bike coming up behind me. Soon I turned left to another street and saw the biker guy turn after me. I wasn't thinking much of it yet until I turned again, and so did he. It seemed strange because he was just circling around that one street, and now he seemed to be following me. Everywhere I went, he would go as well. I drove down that street for some time. Then when I made my next turn, the biker did the same. By this point, I was off campus. I decided to turn at a random spot because I just didn't want this guy on the bike following me anymore. When I turned, he did as well. I just went down that street and then turned back onto the one that I had already been on. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, the guy on the bike did as well. I was beginning to get very creeped out by this guy. Why on earth would he be following me? I just continued with my drive back to my apartment. Soon I got there and I pulled into the parking lot. The bike guy did as well. In my time living there, I had never seen him before. But I guess it was possible that he lived there. However, I didn't think so. Why would he follow me out of the way if he did? So I parked my car, and I didn't know if the bike guy was going to approach me or what. But when I got out, he biked away. He kind of started to ride around the parking lot, just circling it. He didn't approach me or anything. This made me feel a little better, and I quickly walked for the door. I used my key fob to enter the building, and once I was in, I looked back to the guy. He was still riding around the parking lot. I went up to my apartment on the 3rd floor and then got back in my room. I looked out to the parking lot again from my window now and saw that the man was still there on his bike riding around. I didn't know why he was here or why he had followed me. I hung out for a while before going to bed. Back then, I would stay up pretty late. It was probably after midnight when I decided to finally get some sleep. However, I remember that I was in my bedroom and I had turned off all the lights. Everything was dark and quiet. But then I heard a noise out in the hallway. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but then I realized that it was the sound of somebody riding a bike in the hallway. I got up and went out of my bedroom and over to the front door of my apartment. Then I looked out of the peephole. When I did, at first I didn't see anything, but I heard whoever was riding the bike getting closer. Then I saw a bike go past with the same guy riding it. He was now riding the bike up and down the hallways of the 3rd floor. I was really creeped out by this. Obviously, nothing like it had happened before. I decided to just ignore it. I tried to get some sleep, and eventually I was able to. The next morning, the guy was gone, and I never saw him again. I still don't know why he followed me though. I'm also not sure how he got into the building unless somebody let him in. I really don't think that he lived there. I wonder if he was specifically trying to creep me out or something. I have no idea why he would though. I'm a respiratory therapist that works at a local hospital. I was on my way to work about less than a mile away from work when a car in front of me quickly merged onto one of the emergency lanes as if something sudden had just happened. Then he just sat there. No hazards going off, nothing to indicate he planned on moving. I still had 20 minutes before I had to be at work, and assuming this individual may be in distress or have car problems, I decided to be a good Samaritan. I parked on the side of the road and turned on my hazards. We exchanged eye contact and I gestured a wave. I rolled down my window and asked, "Are you okay?" He seemed to have either not heard me or ignored me, but he did seem to realize I wanted to help him. He got out of his car at this point. I was in my work scrubs, which tends to help people relax knowing that they're with a healthcare professional. When he got out of his vehicle, I assumed he would have told me that he was in some type of pain or something that caused him to pull over abruptly. He had been driving fine the entire time that I was behind him prior to that. So I casually got out of my vehicle and walked over to the back end of his car. This is when I officially started a conversation, asking if he was hurt or if something was wrong. I was asking him all basic questions, but his eyes were cold. He had this body language to him that almost made him seem a little bit unhinged or skittish. He had not answered any of my questions, so I tried once more and asked, "Hey man, we're in the middle of a busy road. Is there something wrong with your car or something going on with you?" He simply replied, "No." I started to feel this sensation of discomfort, like he wanted to do something to me but was restraining himself. I continued to play it off. He didn't seem drunk or high, and he had these black beady eyes that I couldn't stop looking at. It was as if he was just a vessel into something dark. I tried to continue the conversation and asked him, "Why'd you stop, man?" He replied, "I don't know where to go." I didn't know what he meant by that, so I questioned further by saying, "Do you know what city you're in right now?" I told him if he was lost, I could tell him where the nearest highway was. His reply was a little chilling. He said, "Anywhere but here." I was now confused. He didn't know where he was, but felt this urge to get out of the area as quick as possible. So I asked, "Well, what direction are you wanting to go? 75N will take you to Dayton, and 75S you'll head to Cincinnati." He asked me, "What would you do in my position?" Now, I had no idea what he meant by this. I simply said, "I don't know what kind of position you're in, man. Can you drive? The hospital I work in is within view, and we don't have to go in." He agreed to follow me, but once I turned on my blinker to turn into the hospital, he completely stopped following me. He pulled a U-turn and sped off. This wasn't the scariest experience in the world, but I just can't forget how foreign and strange this behavior was. Each time we engaged in conversation, it was as if he was contemplating to tell me something, but ultimately remained silent. From the looks of it, he didn't have a broken down car, and it didn't look like he was a substance abuser. He just seemed incredibly nervous, and his fast motion gestures and twitches of all his body language has left me puzzled. It still gives me shudders when I think about how he moved and talked, also not explaining a single reason as to why he just decided to park on the side of the road. A simple, "Oh, I'm just lost," would have even been enough for me to feel better about the entire situation. He just seemed incredibly paranoid and hesitant. On top of that, the entire conversation led nowhere to his situation or why he was acting so strange. The most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me was on a long drive back to college for my last semester before graduation. I'm a night person and was leaving kind of late for the drive, but was expecting to get in around midnight. Since I was going to be living on my own after school, I was feeling a bit sentimental as it felt like I was leaving home for the last time. It's sunset as I was driving towards the highway, and there was a beautiful low fog in the fields along the road catching the light. I decided that it'd be nice to try a more scenic back road route than the normal boring interstate that I usually took. So I decided to cut it off before the highway and take a scenic route towards West Virginia. The last human contact I made for that night was when I stopped at a diner for dinner. I filled up on gas, and I proceeded towards West Virginia as night fell. The fog ended up getting thicker, and it was really hard to see through once it got dark, so I slowed my speed considerably. There are some small towns that I would pass through, but for a Friday night, it was oddly empty at each town that I went through. It was only 10 p.m., but all the local bars looked closed, and there were no lights on in any of the houses. It was strange, but I had never driven this way before, and maybe that's normal for those towns. Anyways, I was making slow progress with the fog on the back roads at night. I was worried about hitting a deer. At around 12 a.m., I got to a large national forest and I had to stop to pee. There was no other traffic around, so I left the engine running, expecting it to just be a quick stop. As I came around the car, undoing my belt, I heard voices maybe 40 or 50 yards into the forest, followed by a scrambling through the dead leaves and brush coming into my direction. It was pitch black out, so I couldn't see anything and I didn't know what was going on, but I was freaked out and did not want to find out more about the voices and the noises. I bolted back to the driver's side of my car and sped away down the road, happy that I had left the car running. A little while later, I was heading up towards some mountains and nearing a scenic overlook for an old fire watch tower. I pulled into the overlook to actually pee this time, as I never got a chance to earlier. I was at the top of a mountain and finally got cell service for the first time in a couple of hours. I checked my phone to see a string of concerned texts and calls from my mom, freaking out and asking if I had made it okay. By this time, I should have been back at college hours ago if I hadn't taken the detour. I knew that she wouldn't go to sleep until I was back safe, so I texted her that I was fine and back to school to put her mind at ease. She immediately called me, sounding extremely worried. I asked what was going on, and my mom said that she got a really weird phone call from West Virginia, which is where I was, but she didn't know that. She went on to say that she got a phone call from a gruff-sounding young man who said he needed to speak to me. She said over the phone that he had used my name, and that he was swearing at her while she could also hear other people in the background screaming and laughing. I have no idea how the stranger on the phone had gotten my mom's number, or how they knew my name. This was bizarre, because I was driving my dad's car, and I'm not registered to it, so even if somebody had ran my plates, they wouldn't get my name from that. I even paid with cash at the diner and gas station, and I wasn't even in West Virginia at this point yet. I couldn't think of anything that I had dropped that would have my name on it when I stepped out of the car briefly while trying to pee earlier. I was pretty freaked out at this point, but I told my mom that I was at school and safe and sound to not scare her anymore. I continued on my way and made it back to school without any further problems. I have forever been confused by what happened that night and who the people in the woods and on the phone were. I was driving home one morning and the roads were not that busy. It was nice to see, and so I drove down the highway and was making good time. There were still other cars on the road, it just wasn't bad traffic or anything. About halfway home, suddenly this car started speeding up from out of nowhere behind me. I figured they would blow past me, but no. It got right up on my tail and then started honking. This made no sense, as I was in a middle lane and not even the left lane. The car looked pretty average, and I didn't think that it was a cop or anything like that. But I moved over to the right lane thinking that the person would pass. But instead, they moved over with me and continued to follow. This was very strange, and I didn't know what was going on. The driver remained behind me and was still honking the horn like crazy. I looked back and saw what appeared to be a woman driving, but I couldn't see many details about her. Like I couldn't tell what her face really looked like or anything, but she didn't seem animated, like she wasn't waving her arms or yelling or anything. So it was strange to hear all the honking from her. She was still honking at me repeatedly and tailgating me though. I didn't know what she wanted. I was now all the way over in the farthest right lane. This wasn't anybody that I knew or anything either, and I hadn't done anything to make somebody mad. I'm confident that I didn't cut anyone off or anything. Usually I'm a very good driver. I don't speed, I always use my turn signals, and I certainly don't cut people off or anything like that. My car is also just a pretty average looking one, so this was a real mystery. I decided to exit the highway, not really sure why, but I just felt like I should. When I did, as you could guess, the woman following me did the same. I drove down a quieter road, and she now stopped honking but was still following me pretty close. I could see her a little better now, and she was wearing sunglasses, so I still didn't have a great view of what she looked like. So she had honked at me for probably like a minute or two straight, and now she had stopped but was still following. I drove down this random road for a while, and then I got the thought to go to a police station. Surely she wouldn't follow me there. So I looked up directions to the nearest one. When I got them, it wasn't too far away. The woman followed me for the entire drive until we got there, and then she stopped. I pulled into the police station and waited. When I felt like it was safe to leave, I did so. I drove the rest of the way back home, thinking I had outsmarted this mystery woman. I got home and then went inside my house. For the rest of the day, nothing happened. However, that night, I was awoken in the middle of the night. I think it was like 1 a.m. The first thing that I heard was the sound of a car honking outside, but it was not an alarm. I got up out of bed and then remembered the woman who had been honking at me on the street earlier. I thought, there's no way that's her. Then I walked over to a front window and looked. Sure enough, it was. The same car was there on the side of the road in front of my house, and she was honking over and over again, just like she had been earlier when she was driving behind me. I was really confused. I turned on the lights to my house as well as the front porch, and then she quickly drove away. I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. I waited for a while to see if she would come back, and then I went back to bed. After that, I never saw her again. I still don't know what her deal was. I've thought about it many times. The only thing that makes any sense to me at all is that she had me confused with someone else. Maybe somebody else cut her off in traffic or did some type of road rage thing to her. Perhaps the car looked similar to mine and she was angry. Or maybe she was stalking some guy who drove a car like mine. Or maybe she was stalking me. But given that it was a one-time incident, I don't think that's the case. But still, the fact that she somehow knew where I lived still blows my mind. She must have secretly followed me home after the police station. That thought really creeps me out because I hadn't noticed at all. Overall, that was something that I will never forget. I'm in my 20s now, but this story happened back when I was only 12 years old. My grandmother and I used to go on yearly road trips across either our own country or the one next to ours, as we lived relatively close to the border. Well, on this occasion we decided to travel across our neighboring country. My grandmother had a friend in the more rural part of the country that she hadn't seen in a long time. After some planning, they figured out the best time for the two of us to make our trip. I was excited when my grandmother first told me about it. I had no idea where we were going, but the idea of going on a road trip was always fun. Fast forward a few months and we finally got in the car and left. The trip would take approximately a week. My grandmother wanted to see all the neat stuff along the way, and traveling with a child such as myself requires a lot of pit stops. I wasn't necessarily a bad traveling companion, but I just had a small bladder. Anyways, we were on the last stretch of the trip when my grandmother had to pull into a gas station to fill up. We were practically running on fumes and I really had to use the bathroom. We pulled into this middle of nowhere gas station, and after my grandmother had filled up the car, we hurried inside so that I could use the restroom. The moment we walked in, alarm bells in my brain went off. I had no idea why I was feeling that way until I set eyes on the clerk. I'm not usually to judge a person by how they present themselves, but this guy looked like a serial killer or something. We were in the center of rural territory, and this man was really giving me the creeps. I really don't know how to explain it other than that. The worst part was that he was smiling this really creepy smile and looking at me and my grandmother. I think my grandmother could sense the creepiness from the guy as well, and I remember that she went up to him and paid for the gas and asked for the key to the washroom, which he took his time to get. She walked with me to the washroom, which was disgusting, and I quickly did my business and we returned the key. Here's where things got worse. We got back into the car, and the man closed the shop and then got into his car. Sure, he was super creepy, but he hadn't done anything too odd yet, until we were supposed to arrive at my grandmother's friend's place. When we left the gas station, the clerk, who had just closed the store in the middle of the day for some reason, followed us. But first, we assumed he was just heading in our direction and was on the road after all. But after a really long time of him still tailing us, my grandmother finally realized that we were being followed. The man proceeded to follow us for 12 hours. My grandmother refused to stop driving unless it was an absolute emergency. She didn't have a phone, and despite somewhat knowing where she was, it was unknown territory for her that she was driving through. Therefore, she waited to get familiar surroundings so there wasn't the risk of getting lost while trying to find a police station. We finally made it to the city where her friend resided, and that was when we finally pulled into a police station. The man had pulled up next to our car just as we headed inside the building, and he watched us. I don't know what he was thinking, but he sat there while my grandmother talked with the lady at the desk. Thankfully, the cops handled the creepy man with ease, and I'll never forget the smile that left his face when the police approached him. Needless to say, that was the last time that we road tripped through that specific country's rural area, and one of the last times we took a road trip in general together, sadly. I had a really creepy experience a few years back when I took a road trip. I was traveling to visit my girlfriend, who at the time was in school far away. She had just 3 months left until she would move back home, but I had some time off work, so I decided to make the drive. I did not fly so that I would save money, and even though it was a long drive, I didn't mind too much because I like road trips. So the plan was for me to drive all day, stay in a cheap hotel the first night, and then arrive at her school the next evening. On the first day of driving, I started after I got off work at about 2 p.m. I drove all the way until about midnight, and then I was too tired to go much farther, and I knew I needed to stop and get some rest. I was kind of in the middle of nowhere at that point though, so I just looked for any kind of a city or town. I took a random exit that had some signs for food. Well, the only food there was McDonald's and a Taco Bell down the road. There was also a gas station. But the only hotel was actually this cheap and run-down looking motel that was about a mile farther down the road from anything else. Surrounding it was nothing but the parking lot and then basically woods off in the distance. There was nowhere else to stay, and this seemed fine to me because of the fact that I wanted to stay at a cheap place anyways. So I drove into the motel parking lot, which was almost completely empty. It looked rough, like I said, but it wasn't completely awful. It seemed like it would be good enough for the night. After parking my car, I walked to the office, which was at the far end of the building. There was a man working, and I got a room for the night, which was very cheap. I felt good about how much money I was saving, and I convinced myself that the place would be fine. When I got into my room, it seemed like a standard motel. The room opened straight out to the sidewalk in front of the parking lot. Then inside the room was a bed, an old TV, and a bathroom. It wasn't that nice, but it didn't seem crazy dirty or anything. So I relaxed in there for a little while until I turned out the lights to go to bed. It was not more than a minute after I had laid down to go to sleep, though, that I heard a knock on the door of the motel room. This gave me a bad feeling right away based on the hour of night that it was and the fact that I was at a sketchy motel. I ignored it at first, but whoever was there knocked again. So finally, I got up out of bed and crept over to the window. There, I carefully moved the shades which had been covering the windows entirely. I looked, and there was a sketchy-looking man standing there outside the door. I couldn't see him that well, but he had longer hair and was wearing a sweatshirt and dark pants. He had a bit of a beard as well, but had an overall dirty appearance. I had never seen him before. He knocked once more, and I moved away. I hoped that he would go away, but he remained there. Finally, I heard him start to leave. I heard him walking off, and I looked out the window and saw him walking away down the sidewalk, and he quickly went out of my sight. He had been at the door for a total of probably 2 minutes. After he was gone, I was really not that tired anymore. My heart was racing. I turned on the TV to try to settle down and be able to go to sleep. For the next 30 minutes or so, I flipped around the channels and was just starting to relax again. Then, as I was still watching the TV, I heard another knock on the door. I was sure that the man was back. I went to the window and looked out of it again. This time, there was a different man there. This guy was wearing all black, had a hooded coat with the hood up, and I could barely see his face. Another sketchy-looking dude. I was definitely not going to answer the door for him either. He knocked again, and I ignored it. Then, this guy actually tried opening the door, which was locked. That really creeped me out, but after not successfully getting into my room, he walked away. I was so confused. 2 sketchy guys trying to get into my room. What did they want? I was certainly not going to be able to fall asleep now. I went back to watching TV, just trying to take my mind off of it. For the next 30 minutes or so, nothing happened. Then there was another knocking on the door. I looked, and it appeared as though the first guy was back. He knocked on the door louder than before. I watched him through the window, and he was standing there similar to earlier. The strange thing is that all my lights were still off, and had never been on when the guys were there. The TV was on, but it wasn't providing that much light or sound. Why did these guys think that somebody was here? The guy stayed at my door for longer this time. He knocked again, and I was really creeped out. Finally, then, he left. I stayed up watching TV for over an hour. In that time, nobody came back, and then I was finally able to fall asleep. I'm not even sure how many hours of sleep I got that night, but thankfully nobody returned. I left the next morning and drove all the way to my girlfriend's college. Looking back, that's something that I still think about from time to time. I never figured out who those guys were or what they wanted. One night, I had worked late at the job site, and I went to drive back home. I was glad to finally leave, and all the roads were very quiet at this hour. I should also mention that this was a little bit out in the country as well. As I drove on these quiet and curving roads, I came around a bend to see something strange. There was a car parked on my side of the road, halfway off the road and halfway in my lane. And this was a narrow 2-lane road, one for each direction of traffic. So I was really confused to see this and had to slow down right away. But what I also very quickly noticed was that the car that was on the side of the road was facing the wrong way. The car was facing me, but halfway in my lane, and it also had the front passenger's side door open. But surprisingly, I did not see anybody in sight. I thought maybe it was a crash, but there was no noticeable damage to the car, and there was no skid marks on the road or anything. Obviously, I had to slow down significantly to avoid it and go around. As I was close to the car and approaching, this man came out from behind the car, seemingly out of nowhere. He then walked into the road and right in front of my car, waving to me. I slowed down even more and then came to a stop, wondering what was going on. The man walked up to my window. I remember that he had glasses, a mustache, and was kind of short. He came to my front passenger window and I asked him what happened. I remember he said that his car had broken down and he didn't know what to do. He then asked me if I could please help him. I asked him why his car was facing the wrong way. The man just said that he didn't know what to do and that he needed help. I asked him if he could move the car at all, and he said no. He once more asked me to come out and help him with the car. I could not figure out why the car was parked like that and what exactly was going on. To me, the whole thing seemed suspicious. According to the man, the car was broken and would not work, but he didn't know why. I knew a little about cars, but not a ton. I thought a better idea would be for him to call someone or something like that. So I asked him if he had called anyone, and he said no. I offered to call the cops for him or something like that, but the guy strongly said no. He once again asked me to get out and help him, but I said no, I could not, and then I rolled up my window and drove away. The man seemed really sketchy in my opinion, so I drove off down the road. But right after I left the scene, I figured that I would call in and report it to the police, because the man was in a bad spot, really in the way of the road, and could potentially cause a crash or something. I realized that I should get the guy's license plate or something, so I decided to turn around. I was just going to drive up and then turn around and keep going on my way when I got the plate number. So there I stopped and turned around in the road as there were no other people around. Then I headed back to the site. Less than a minute later, I arrived. However, when I got there, I saw that the car and the man were both gone. They were nowhere in sight. I thought that he said his car was broken and he didn't know what was wrong with it and he couldn't move it. I guess not. This made the whole thing seem that much more strange to me. I drove down the road a bit to see if I could find his car driving, but I did not. So at that point, I just turned back around and continued home. I've been on that road many times since then, and nothing like that has happened since. It was a really strange situation, and I really wonder what that man's true intentions were. This is something crazy that happened a few years ago. During this time, I lived alone in a pretty average house in a neighborhood. I would work late all the time, and sometimes arrived back home after 10 p.m. or even almost midnight sometimes. So one night I worked late and then drove back home. When I got to my street, I was driving past my house to go in the driveway when I saw something. There was a man standing in the front yard just in front of my house. I slowed down, but instead of pulling into the driveway, stayed on the other side of the road. Then I came to a stop and just watched the guy. I was now really suspicious and wondering what this man was doing in my front yard. The guy seemed to notice me and then he jogged through the yard. He ran into the street and I saw him get into a car that was parked on the side of the road a little ways down. The car was in front of one of my neighbor's houses, and cars parked on the side of my street were not that unusual. After the guy got into the car though, I expected him to drive away. I stayed there in my car, not moving, hoping to get a look at the license plate of the car as it left. After the guy got into the car, he started to drive away, but he drove towards my car on the street. I saw that there was no license plate on the car, which was a pretty normal-looking sedan. He got behind me and then stopped. I thought it was really weird, and I drove forward and started to turn into my driveway. But as soon as I started to turn, I saw that the guy behind me was starting to turn as well. Was he going to follow me into my driveway? I quickly changed my mind and instead of turning into the driveway, turned left and went back onto the road. I nearly went off the road, but then was back on my street going down it. The guy in the car followed me doing the same thing. I was very weirded out by this guy and didn't know what was going on. I drove to the end of my street and then turned onto a busier one. Then I drove down that for a while with really no idea where I was going. I randomly drove down a few roads and then turned a few times. The guy behind me stayed with me. So after like 10 minutes, I decided to call the cops. I got out my cell phone and dialed 911. I told them what happened and where I was. I said that I was going to keep driving on that road. I was told that an officer in the area would arrive shortly. Then, just after the phone call with the police, the car following me randomly turned at a road. He went into some random neighborhood and out of my sight. I kept driving anyways, and a few minutes later I saw the cop. I pulled over and talked with the police officer about everything that had happened. I was told that they would look for the car and should check my house if it was broken into, so I went back home and looked around. There was no sign of a break-in. Nothing was broken or missing. After that, I never got word if they found the man or not. I'm guessing not. I have no idea what he was doing at my house and why he followed me. Was he planning to break in? Possibly I got home just before he did. But why would he not just leave? Why did he follow me for so long? It was very strange. One night I had gone to the supermarket really late. I was just getting a few things, and the store was not that far from my apartment. In fact, it was probably only a little over a mile away. So I went there and then left to go home. By now it was after 10 o'clock at night, and the roads were virtually empty. I made it almost all the way back. I was on this road that's pretty busy during the day, but not at night, and I came to an intersection. The light was red, so I came to a stop. No other cars were really around me, and all I had to do to get home now was drive a really short ways up the road, take a left, and then my apartment complex was off that street. As I sat there at the red light, I noticed someone going from the sidewalk to the crosswalk in front of my car. It was a younger-looking man who had blonde hair, and he started walking across the road. Right when he had made it about in front of my car, he looked over at me. I expected him to just keep walking, and at first he did. But then he turned suddenly and then went to the left and started running towards my car. He sprinted all the way there, got to my driver's door, and tried opening it. It was locked, and the guy then began banging on the window before I just hit the gas and took off. The whole thing really took me by surprise. The light was still red, but I didn't even care. Nobody else was coming from the other directions. As soon as I started to drive away from the guy, I saw him turn, and I looked in my mirror, and he started sprinting the rest of the way across the crosswalk, now crossing the street. I drove up the road and then turned to the left, and soon I arrived back at my apartment. I parked in my parking space and finally felt safe and realized that I should probably call the cops and report what happened. It seemed like an attempted carjacking. So I took out my phone and dialed 911. I sat there in my car and told them what happened. They said they would go investigate, and after I ended the call, I left my vehicle to go inside my apartment. However, as soon as I got outside my car, I noticed something off in the distance. A man was jogging into the apartment complex, and I realized that it was the same guy. He had just continued jogging down the side of the road after he crossed the street, and he was now at my apartment. He was looking at me and running straight for me, so I quickly started running from my apartment to get inside. I was easily able to get to the door well before him, and I looked back and saw that he was a lot closer now, but he was still probably about 50 yards away. I tried to unlock the door, but my key fob didn't work the first time, which happens sometimes and is annoying. But it was especially frustrating in this situation. I tried it again, and thankfully it worked on the second try. I quickly got in and shut the door, still with some time to spare. Then I walked away, and soon after heard the man trying and failing to get inside. I walked up to my apartment and then called the cops again, letting them know that the man was now chasing after me at my apartment. The police came to my building, but the man was gone by then. He probably ran off someplace else. I gave the cops all the information that I could. That was a really crazy situation. I still don't know who that guy was or why he seemed to randomly go after me. It was one thing to go after my car, but another to run all the way to my apartment building and continue to try to get me. What were his plans? I'm glad that I never saw him again after that. A couple of years ago, my husband and I took a road trip to Yosemite National Park. We didn't camp in the park, but we stayed outside of it at a hotel in a nearby town. One evening, while we were making the road trip back from the valley, I noticed that the headlights of our car caught what appeared to be somebody laying down on the side of the road, with both feet pointed towards the street. I told my husband that there was a person laying there as we passed by. My husband told me that I was just seeing things and maybe it was a trash bag or something, but I was so certain I just kept telling him no. For the rest of the drive back, we argued about it, and by the time we made it back to the hotel, I seemed to change my husband's mind. I think he realized how adamant I was about it, and he believed me. He asked me if I was sure about it and if I wanted to go back. I said yes, I was very certain, so we drove back to the spot. We made it past, and I saw the person again, so we turned the car around. My husband then stopped next to the person and rolled down his window. He asked, "Are you okay?" There was no answer. One more time, even louder, he asked, "Are you okay?" Suddenly, a woman dressed in all black sat up. She was wearing a nice brown jacket, black pants, and had her purse and 3 water bottles. Her makeup was done nicely, and she seemed very sweet. I could tell that my husband was absolutely shocked. The woman looked to be in her late 40s, and I asked her where she was headed. She said that she was trying to get to the Chevron station up the road, and that her mom was going to meet her there to pick her up. I knew that something weird was going on, because where we found her and the Chevron station was still another 7 miles away. She said in her mind she thought it was only a mile from her hotel and that she could make the walk. We offered her a ride, and she climbed into the back seat. As we drove, we tried to ask her questions, mainly just chit-chat. I asked why she was laying on the side of the road. She said she had gotten tired of walking and just laid down, ready to give up. It was winter and she had no hat or gloves with her. I could tell that she was very fragile. Once we arrived at the Chevron station, she thanked us, got out of the car, and sat on a bench in front of the closed Chevron station store. We offered to stay with her until her mom arrived, but she said she would be fine. I reminded her that there was no cell phone reception in the area and triple-checked that she didn't want us to wait with her. She said no, and we drove back to our hotel at that point and noticed that there were now 2 police cars in the parking lot. They had not been there the first time that we arrived back from the valley that evening. I told my husband I knew they had to be there for that woman. I calmly walked over to one of the cars and asked if they were looking for a missing woman. The officer told me that they were and asked if I had seen her. I explained the situation and that I really felt like the woman had something very bad happen to her. He thanked us for picking her up and giving her a ride. He couldn't tell me what had happened, but thought that her leaving and going somewhere was a smart choice. I asked the cops to please go check on her at the Chevron station to make sure that she was okay and that her mom finally did arrive. I realized that whatever had happened at the same hotel we were staying at. That evening, I looked up the local police log and found that a domestic violence dispute had broken out at the hotel. The woman had been very badly beaten, and she was so terrified that she was willing to walk in the dark without a flashlight just to escape. It's my guess that after walking about a half-mile from the hotel, she was in so much pain that she needed to lay down. I got the feeling like she thought she might lay down and die there on the road. She couldn't go back to the hotel because she had already escaped and gone to the front desk to call her mom. Her husband knew she'd be there and would have to come and get her. The front office called the police for her while she escaped. It's my understanding that the man who hurt her was her husband and he was arrested. I always wondered about her, whether she went back to him. Hopefully not. I also hope that the cops ended up checking on her and that her mom did come and pick her up. This was about 11 years ago now, but I still remember it vividly. I was 18 years old and driving along a quiet residential road in my hometown in New Zealand. I was on my way to pick up my friend because I had bought us tickets to a movie. There was a school on the road, so the speed limit was low. As I was driving along, I noticed an older man in his mid-50s standing in the middle of the road up ahead, frantically waving his arms. There were no other cars around, and with no idea what else to do, I pulled over and let down my window. For the first time, I noticed a woman laying on the sidewalk holding her leg. The man approached in a panic and said, "Help, you have to drive us to the hospital. My wife needs medical assistance immediately." I looked over at her, and she looked to be injured. I thought that maybe she had been hit by a car or something. I instantly pulled out my phone and began to dial the emergency number, starting to feel panicked for the woman. He saw my phone and said, "No, there honestly isn't time. You have to help us now. She needs to get to the hospital." In hindsight, I should have held my ground and called an ambulance. However, I knew the hospital was relatively close. I also didn't want to be responsible for this woman's potential injury getting worse, so being young and foolish, I unlocked my car doors. The man helped the woman into the back seat, and then he hopped into the front. They were relatively normal dressed, but I now noticed that he was holding a black trash bag. The moment they got in, the woman stopped looking injured, sat bolt upright, and stared at me in the rearview mirror. I was shocked. Instantly, the man just said, "Drive." I got to the end of the road and signaled right, because that was the direction of the hospital. The man said firmly and now completely calm, "No, go left." He wanted me to take them to a suburb, which was about a 10 minutes drive away. "But don't you have to go to the hospital?" I said. I was met with silence to my question. My whole body went numb, and I started driving towards the suburb, noting to myself that there was a large police station in that suburb. As I was driving, completely disembodied, the woman in the back suddenly said, "I know everything about you." I was freaked out as I stammered out a "what?" in response. "Yes, I know you're an Aquarius." She kind of cackled after she said it too. Joke's on her because she was completely wrong, and that made me feel a little better. Regardless, I agreed, and thankfully her speaking jolted me out of autopilot mode. I pulled over and said, "You need to get out here." Neither of them moved. "It's just down the road," the man said, and kind of indicated towards his black trash bag. Guns are very rare in New Zealand, so my mind didn't go there, but I just kind of felt like something in that bag was intended as a threat. I kept driving, sweating and on the verge of tears until we reached the suburb. I pulled over immediately near the police station and said, "Get out," firmly. They didn't move, and the man in a deadpan tone told me to keep driving to an even farther suburb. Thankfully, I finally had a good idea and just took out the keys and got out of the car, maintaining a distance. They sat there for like 2 minutes, which honestly felt like an hour. Eventually, they opened the doors and finally got out. The woman was holding a book she'd picked up from the back seat. It was a book from class which I had used for my final exam. The woman asked if she could have the book, and I shouted, "Yes, just go." With that, they walked off quietly down the road. I got back in the car, shaking, and drove to my friend's house, who was initially annoyed I might have made us late to the movie. When I told him what happened, though, he understood, and we called the police. They took my details and promised to look for them and make sure they were okay and not up to anything nefarious. I calmed down after speaking to the police. But when my friend and I were halfway through the movie, I remembered with a sudden feeling of absolute dread that I'd written my full name on the inside cover of that book for class. I never heard from the cops or saw the old couple again. I have no idea what they intended, if anything. Perhaps they were just after a free ride, but in any case, it was extremely creepy, and I still think about that cackling woman with my book from time to time. My friend and I were on a road trip on our way back to Kentucky from Ohio after a concert. We got about 20 miles out from the venue, and we both decided to stop and grab a snack, as well as use the bathroom before the long overnight drive. We did our business, got our snacks, and hopped back into my car and ate. I looked at the GPS and realized it changed our route from the interstate to down some highway. I didn't really question it much because it was already midnight and we were tired and just wanted to go home. We started making our way down the highway when I realized there was literally nothing. No other buildings, no lights along the road. The only place I saw when we got off the exit was that gas station. Just the gas station and absolutely nothing else. There were hardly any trees we could see on our way down the highway, just open and flat fields. My GPS told me after 4 to 6 miles to turn on a small road. I thought it was weird that I had to turn on a road that didn't even have 2 lanes or any lights. Just 3 sporadically placed houses that didn't even look like somebody lived in them. At this point, I started feeling off, but I didn't know the area and thought that it was a small connector road back to the interstate or something that was saving us time. I initially felt weird when we went to the highway instead of the interstate, but I thought that I was just being paranoid. My GPS told me that there was a railroad coming up, so I was ready for it. Problem was, I didn't see the railroad until we came right on top of it, the only light coming from my headlights. I had to slam on the brakes a bit because there was a train sitting on the tracks, blocking the entire road. The train looked abandoned, the carts covered in graffiti, and the wheels corroded badly. There were no railroad lights, no bells saying a train was coming through, just pitch darkness and silence. My friend and I both felt a chill run down our spine as we tried to make sense of the situation. We didn't know what exactly, we just had the feeling that something was off. My friend said my name in a scared tone, and I knew I had to get us out. There was no way forward around the train, though. I put my car into reverse quickly and backed up until I was on the grass side of the road, and then I could turn around on the small road. As I began backing up, I saw figures and shadows in my rearview mirror, and I almost had a heart attack as multiple people jumped out of the tall grass that was beside the road. Then they went up to the car and pulled on the door handles of my car trying to get in. I booked it out of there, not caring if I ran anyone over on my way out. I proceeded to go 20 over the speed limit back down the highway and back to the gas station. When we finally collected ourselves, we sat and thought about it. Why would the GPS take us there if a train had clearly been sitting there for a while? Wouldn't that road have been closed off on maps and it would never route us there? With the clear ambush that had been laid and waiting for us, the possible option made sense that somebody had changed the route manually on our GPS while we were both inside of the gas station. We don't remember if we had locked the car doors or not, but we were tired from the concert, so it was easy to believe that we didn't. So many questions. But one thing I noticed the moment we parked at the gas station for the second time and restarted my GPS was that it went back to its original route on the interstate. We knew for certain that the train didn't just break down that day and they left it. It had been sitting for a while. The wheels just don't corrode like that if it was only broken down for just one day. I think we had somehow been victims of some elaborately laid trap for carjacking or worse. There is a road in southern Indiana that is widely believed to be haunted by a man who owned slaves. He would sacrifice them under a bridge during a full moon. He was a devil worshipper. I live in Pennsylvania, but occasionally visit southern Indiana to see my dad's side of the family. One time, about a year ago, I was hanging out with a friend, and he told me all about this haunted bridge. I didn't believe him at all, so later that night he asked if I wanted to go prove it. I resisted at first, but eventually went. When we turned onto the road, I immediately felt intense dread. All that was around us was thick woods. Odd things started happening when we got into the bridge that he would sacrifice his slaves under. First, I heard a terrifying scream that came from the creek below the bridge. Then, a little farther down the bridge, I heard what seemed to be a cat screeching. At this point, I was already ready to go, but the road was a dead end, so we had to turn around. We turned around and started back over the bridge. No noises were heard as we went back over it, but about a minute after we got off the bridge, a girl in the front seat yelled that she saw a red orb behind the car. So instinctively, I turned around to see, and I also saw the orb. It was a very dim light that you had to focus on to see, but it was there. There were no road signs or reflective things to create that illusion. The orb followed us for a couple more minutes, and then it started to gain. When it got close, the car completely stalled. The driver, my friend's mom, tried to turn the car back on, but it didn't turn on until about her 5th try. We continued down the road, driving way over the speed limit to get out of there. Then, later down the road, the orb started to gain on us again, but I wasn't looking. The girl yelled that it was in the car, and the car instantly turned off. This time, it wouldn't turn back on for a minute or so. Since there were rumored disappearances on that road, I thought for sure it was the end for me, but the mom did end up getting the car started. For the rest of the ride, nothing else happened other than the orb keeping a steady distance from the car. The orb went away once we exited off the road. When we got home, my friend and I decided to examine the car doors. There were multiple handprints in places we wouldn't have touched while getting out of the car. I struggled sleeping that night, of course, but I finally fell asleep at around 3:30 in the morning. At 4, I was ripped out of my sleep. The TV had been turned way up and just presented static and the very loud noise that accompanies static. Nobody else was awake, so it could have been a prank. Everybody was freaked out. That could be a coincidence, but if so, it was a very timely coincidence. Since then, I haven't had any other experiences that could be tied to that road. It was late summer, and I was driving home after a long shift at work. The sun was setting, leaving the highway dim and quiet. I was almost halfway home when I noticed something strange in my peripheral vision. As I approached a bend in the road, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing by the side of the highway. It was a woman, or at least it looked like one. She was wearing a long white dress, her hair hanging over her face. I slowed down, unsure of what to do, thinking maybe she needed help, even if it was kind of odd for her to be out at this time of the day. I pulled over a few yards ahead. I glanced in the mirror and saw her still standing there, not moving. I hesitated, but finally decided to get out of the car and check on her. Maybe she really did need help. As I approached, I called out, "Are you okay?" But I got no response. I felt a chill creep through me, and something felt off. Just then, I heard the faint sound of a car engine behind me. I turned around to see another vehicle approaching. I thought maybe it was a good thing to have another person here to help the woman, but as the headlights swept across the road, I felt an icy dread wash over me. The woman was gone. One moment she was there, and the next she had vanished into thin air. I felt like I had just got myself into a very bad situation. I turned back towards my car, hoping to get away before anything else happened. The car pulled up beside me though, and through the rolled down window, a man spoke to me, asking what I was doing there. He actually seemed really nice, and asked me if I was having car trouble. I told him I was alright, and thought I saw somebody else who might have needed help. He pointed towards the direction I had just come from, saying, "You saw her, didn't you? The woman in white. She's always here," he continued. He shrugged and said that she just appears and disappears, sometimes trying to get people to stop, and other times just watching. After making sure that I didn't need anything, the man was on his way down the road, and so was I after getting back to my car. The image of her face, hidden behind her hair, stayed with me though. I go to the gym to work out every day before my job. So I usually get to the gym at about 6 a.m., and I leave the house sometime before that. One morning last year, I left my house about 5:30 a.m. to go to the gym. It's about a 15-minute drive because I live in an area that's somewhat out in the country. As you could guess, the roads are pretty much completely empty at that hour. It was also completely dark out. I was driving on this narrow road that went in between some woods. This stretch of road lasted for a good mile or two. Right in the middle of it, up ahead in the road, I saw something. I wasn't watching that particular section of the road because it was kind of far up ahead. But quickly I saw what looked like a large tree branch falling down onto the road. I hit my brakes and slowed down to see what it was that was on the ground in front of me. It was a very large branch that had fallen onto the road and was covering almost the entire street. I had to come to a complete stop just in front of it, but I looked to my left and realized that I could possibly go around it. My car is an SUV and it has four-wheel drive, which has worked pretty well in my experiences. So I carefully went very slow and then drove to the left of this large tree branch that was on the road. As I was starting to go into the grass, I suddenly heard somebody trying to open one of my rear doors to my car. I looked back and saw a guy standing right outside my door. There was then another guy on the other side of my car who tried opening the other door. I hit the gas harder and my car jolted ahead. My car went slightly off-road and part of the right side ran over some of the end of the tree branch, but overall I was able to make it past the obstruction. The guys who were trying to get into my car couldn't keep up. The guy on the passenger side of my car ended up tripping and falling on the tree branch. I kept driving down the road and then called the police and reported what was happening. As I continued driving, I realized that the tree branch most likely didn't fall onto the street on its own. It seems too crazy for it to just fall like that. This was definitely a setup. The two guys probably tossed it onto the road when they saw me coming. Their plan was to ambush me when I stopped. They were probably hoping that I would get out to move the branch, but thankfully I was able to just go around it. The next time that I drove down that road, the branch was gone and things were fine. I don't think the police found the guys though. I mean, they might have, but I never heard anything about it. It's just really crazy because where I live there generally isn't much crime. It's a quiet area out in the country with not many people at all. So something like this is very out of the normal. Nothing like it has happened since either. This happened back when I was in college. For my senior year, I lived in this college house with my roommate Amanda. When we lived there, we did not have a driveway, so we used to just park on the side of the street. I did this every day and would drive to and from classes and stuff. So one morning, I left the house to head to class. When I got to my car, I saw that there was a note on it like I got a ticket. And I thought that it was a ticket at first, but I didn't know why I would get one. I was parked on the correct side of the street and nothing was weird about the way I had parked either. My car's license and tabs were up to date and everything, so I didn't know what it could be. I took the note, got into my car, and then read it. It was not a ticket. I unfolded the piece of paper and it said, "Watch your back." It was written in pen, and that was all it said. I had no idea why somebody would write this. I immediately assumed that it had to be a prank, but I didn't know who would do it or why. It just made no sense why anybody would leave this note on my car. Could it be a mistake? I drove to class and I ended up being gone literally all day. I had several classes and then I stayed on campus and studied, and then I had my work on campus job after that. When I was done with work, it was nighttime and I drove home after the long day. It was only like a 5-minute drive, so not bad at all. By that hour, obviously the roads were quiet, and our street always was anyways. But I really paid no attention to the drive. I don't remember much about it. I can tell you though that when I pulled onto our street, I remember a car pulling onto it right behind me. I certainly noticed that because of the headlights right behind me and nobody else being on the street. So I drove down towards our house, and then I slowed down and started to pull over where I always do. To my surprise, the car behind me did the same. It looked to be an average-looking sedan, and I obviously could not tell who was driving it with it being nighttime and dark out. I pulled over and stopped in about my usual spot, but when I did, the car stopped a ways back behind me. This either had to be my roommate or our neighbor, except it didn't look like my roommate's car, and I was pretty sure that she was already home. And I didn't remember the neighbor ever parking on the side of the road like that, or having that kind of car. So I stopped, sat in my car, and waited to see who would get out. By this point, I was remembering the note telling me to watch my back. I had forgotten about it for most of the day up until that point. As I sat there and watched the car behind me, nobody was getting out of it. I was getting really nervous. Who could it be? I waited in the car for a few more minutes, and nobody ever got out of the car behind me. In fact, it was still running. So I decided to drive away and leave. I thought that the car might follow me when I did, but surprisingly to me, it did not. I drove back towards campus and then turned around and decided to go back to my house when I realized I wasn't being followed. If the car was still there, I would drive around some more. So I was gone for maybe 10 minutes, and when I pulled back onto my street, the car was gone. I felt better, but was still really suspicious and careful. I pulled over and then looked around. The coast was clear. I got out of my car and then ran for the front door. I made it, but then saw that there was now a note stuck to the front door of our house. I took it and went inside. Once there, I read the note. It said, "Why do you leave? Are you scared of me?" I was really creeped out to see that. This confirmed that the person that left the note on my car was the same person who had followed me home. I hoped that they were still not around. I covered all the windows and made sure that the doors were locked, and I told my roommate about it. We were pretty paranoid that night, but didn't see or hear anything strange. We looked out the window every so often, but the car did not return. So the next day, things seemed fine. There was no note on my car that morning or anything like that. I went to classes and stuff and had a pretty normal day. I got back earlier that time and was not followed home. I hoped that the whole situation was a one-time thing, or maybe some kind of weird prank. I was in my bedroom studying that night when my roommate called me. She was downstairs in the living room, which was at the front of the house. I went down there and she was looking out the front window. It was mostly covered, but she was carefully looking at it and said that there was a car out there on the side of the road. I looked and the car was parked in the spot behind mine and the engine was running. My roommate told me that the car had been there for a long time, and she asked me if that was the car that had followed me home the previous night. It was. I told her yes, and we moved away from the window. Then we decided to call the cops. I didn't think the person was doing anything illegal, but with the notes he left, it could be considered a threat. Maybe even considered stalking. The only thing I knew was that whoever they were really creeping us out, and we didn't know what they were capable of. We reported what was going on, how I thought the car had followed me home the previous night, and the creepy notes that were left as well. We were told that an officer would be out there shortly, and a few minutes later, the car was still there. The cop arrived, and the car began to drive away before it was pulled over, still on our street. We saw the officer get out and talk to the driver, but we still couldn't see who the driver was. They talked for a while, and then eventually the car drove away. The cop then came over and spoke with us. He said that a guy was driving, and the guy claimed that he was just hanging out and waiting to pick up his friend. He was told to leave and not come back, and was questioned about leaving notes, but the guy denied it. The man said that he would leave and would not come back. We were worried that he would return though, and the cop said that if he did, to call again. After that though, the guy never returned, and I never did get any more notes or anything either. I think the interaction with police probably scared him off and stopped him from doing whatever he was doing, but I never found out exactly who the guy was. Had he been stalking me or something? I'm not sure what he was planning to do. I was about 8 or 9 years old when this happened. My mom and I would take frequent weekend road trips when I was young, normally to national parks or trail areas to get me out in nature. We used to do this often, usually just the two of us. I don't remember where we were going that day, just that it was a long highway with lots of trees and no towns for miles. It was late afternoon. We had been driving for a while when we saw a man standing on the shoulder wearing a safety vest. He was waving his arm, not like he needed a ride, but like he was trying to warn us about something. My mom slowed down. I remember her saying, "Maybe there's an accident up ahead." She pulled over. Before I could even ask what was happening, the man opened the back door and got in. He was dirty. That was one thing I did remember clearly. His hands and face looked like he hadn't washed in days. He started talking right away. At first, it was random things. Something about being in the military, having to hitchhike to get to base, and saying it was normal. I didn't understand most of what he said. A lot of it didn't make sense. Then he started talking about nurses at a psych hospital, saying they had found his stuff. He used the word stuff before laughing and calling it something that I will not repeat. He looked at me when he said it too. My mom didn't react. She just kept driving, staring ahead. She asked him questions the whole ride, not deep questions, just enough to keep him talking. I realize now that she was trying to keep him focused on her, not me. Every now and then he'd ask me a question, but my mom would interrupt him with another one. She kept the conversation going like it was casual. I remember making myself small, turning towards the car door. I stared at the road signs because I didn't want to look at the man. He started commenting on my mom's driving, saying she was going too fast. She just laughed it off and said that she didn't want to fall asleep at the wheel. Later, she told me that she was hoping a cop car would pull her over. That was her plan. It started raining hard, not just a drizzle, but a heavy rain. We passed under an overpass, and my mom told the man that she would pull over and let him out so he could stay dry. He didn't want to leave yet. He kept saying things like, "I'm not bothering you," and "Come on, we're just talking." My mom kept her voice calm and said that we were going in another direction soon, and he'd be better off hitchhiking a different ride from the dry underpass instead of out in the rain a few miles down. Thankfully, this seemed to make a lot of sense to him, and he got out of the car. He stood under the overpass, just staring at us as we pulled away. We didn't talk for a while. I think my mom didn't want to scare me, but I knew something wasn't right. Years later, she told me how scared she really was. She had no intention of picking up a hitchhiker. She thought it was a construction worker, but after he jumped in, she didn't know what to do. She also didn't know what he was going to do or what would have happened if he hadn't gotten out when he did. She said she kept thinking about how we weren't really near any towns either, and if something crazy happened, we didn't stand much of a chance in the middle of nowhere. We were lucky, that's the truth. One night, I was driving back home from my parents' house through a rural area in southern Germany. It was late at night and a relatively quiet ride, until the road ahead was blocked by a long dead tree type of log. I was super annoyed by this because this was literally the only road available. It would take me another hour at least to backtrack and take a different way. When I got out of the car to further inspect the roadblock, I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Germany is tame when it comes to wildlife in rural areas, so there's usually no serious wildlife encounters apart from hedgehogs or deer. I started to move the log out of the way so that I could pass. The log was light enough that I could drag it across the ground by myself, but it took some effort. I don't know how long it took me to move it, but by the time I was finished, another car had stopped not far behind me, waiting for me to continue driving. At least, that's what I thought. As soon as I got back into the driver's seat and continued my drive, I noticed that the car was following me. At first, I assumed it might have been coincidental, because on a singular road with nowhere else to go, it was only natural that the other car would take the same route as me. But it got weirder as soon as I entered the next town and the car was still following me. I panicked, called the police, and informed them of the situation. I told them that I was driving home, so that they could intercept the stranger as soon as we arrived at my home address. Since I was relatively close to my house already, I knew it'd probably take the police a few more minutes until they got there as well, so I decided to park a few houses away to not appear suspicious. I continued to sit in the driver's seat and see if the car was still around, and indeed, the stranger even parked directly behind me. At this point, I had the pepper spray at the ready. The doors were locked from the inside, and I was obviously super anxious when a man got out of the car and walked up to my window. He was waving at first and gesturing towards the back of my car. Confused by this, I decided to roll down the window a tiny bit to ask what's up with the guy. The man explained that he had only been following me to inform me that while he approached my car on the roadblock, a stranger had snuck into my trunk and was probably still there. I was absolutely bewildered, yet terrified by this. I didn't believe the guy outside my window at first, but then he showed me that he also called the police prior to our conversation, so I trusted him enough to get out of the car. Soon after, the police arrived, opened my trunk, and arrested a guy that had been hiding in there. Turns out, my initial stalker was telling the truth, and he was really trying to help me out. I didn't find out the details of who the guy in the trunk was, but I'm assuming he had ill intentions, probably to break into my house at the least. The car I drive doesn't lock automatically, and since then, I've never drove around with an unlocked car. The scary part too is that in the car I drive, the trunk is directly connected to the front of the car with one of those little doors in the back seat. This guy could have potentially just crawled into the back seat from the trunk if he knew it was there. My brother and I were driving home from a festival in Washington. We were driving back around 3 a.m. through the gorge a bit outside of Portland. If you're not familiar with this area, the highway runs right along a river and you're surrounded by trees. Since it was 3 a.m., there were no other cars in sight, just pitch black. My brother and I were listening to a true crime podcast, which was already contributing to the mood. There were no cars around us until we suddenly saw a car pull up in front of us. When they saw us, they suddenly turned on their right turn signal and pulled off the 2-lane road. My brother found this odd, but I thought, hey, maybe they just don't want us behind them. Fair enough. I realized very quickly that this wasn't the case, because once they pulled back onto the road behind us, they suddenly sped up until they were right on our tail. They moved into the left lane and then cut back into the right lane in front of us. Odd behavior, but I had definitely seen weirder things. Once they had cut in front of us, they put on their right turn signal again and pulled off the road again. Now my brother and I were getting a little creeped out, because keep in mind it was pitch black outside. There were no other cars, and you could only go one direction. We passed them again, and I told my brother to move into the left lane and just keep going. Once we passed them for the second time, they pulled back onto the road again. They sped up in the right lane until they were about 500 feet behind us. I was keeping an eye on them in the rearview mirror. They suddenly switched their lights off. My skin crawled. We had no idea where they were, but we knew that they were behind us. Suddenly, our car's blind spot monitor in the mirror went off, and we knew that their car was right by us. The car suddenly switched their lights back on and sped past us. By this point, we saw another car's headlights coming behind us, and a sigh of relief washed over me. We didn't see that crazy car again after that. I'm 99% sure that it was just some bored teenager trying to give us the creeps, and they did a great job, but I sometimes wonder if they had other intentions. This is something that took place back when I was in high school. It was my senior year, and I would drive to and from school every day. It was between a 10 and 15-minute drive depending on traffic, and living near the city there was often a good amount of it. After leaving school one day, I began driving on the road next to it. That road always had a ton of traffic from kids leaving school and stuff. Then I would drive down that road and I had to make a right onto the next road. This one was also often busy. It could be stressful, but I got used to it after a while. However, on this day in particular, I came to the right-hand turn and had to wait because it was red. There were cars going straight, and then there would be other cars waiting to cross. First there was a green arrow for the cars across the street who were turning left. That was the same direction that I was going. So I waited for them, and then when the light turned green for me, 1 or 2 cars were squeezing through the end of the light and I had to wait for them as well. Then finally, when they were gone, I started to go. But there was this one last car who went through the light when it was completely red. The people that were going straight had to stop and wait for him for a second. I had already started to turn, but thankfully I saw him and I slammed on my brakes. He sped past me and I honked my horn at him when he did. It was crazy how bad of a red light that he went through, and if I wasn't paying attention he possibly would have hit me, which would have been his fault by the way. So anyways, after he went past me, I saw him flip me off through the window. He was driving some older small car that looked like crap. I wouldn't expect anything less from him. So I started driving now behind him and expected him to speed away. Except he didn't. He then slowed down, and I figured that he wanted a confrontation. I didn't care. I honked at him because he deserved it. That's what horns are for. But now, I just wanted to get home safe. So I drove past him and didn't even look in his direction. I figured he was flipping me off or yelling at me or something, but I just kept my eyes straight on the road and minded my business. After I passed him though, he started following me. He went right on my tail, and I was really angry with this guy now, but I just kept driving home and hoped that he would stop. Maybe he would tailgate me for a while and try to get a reaction out of me. Eventually, he would probably get tired of it and stop. I mean, if he was in such a hurry to go through the red light to begin with, why did he want to slow down and mess around with me? I turned where I had to go and continued the drive. The crazy guy remained behind me. Eventually, we got to my neighborhood. Nothing really had changed. He wasn't honking or making any motions with his hands anymore or anything. He was just following me real close. When I got to my street, I turned down it. I wasn't really sure what else to do. The thought never occurred to me to go to the police or something like that. So I arrived back home and turned into the driveway. It was like 3 p.m., so unfortunately neither of my parents were home from work yet, and my only sibling, my older sister, was in college, so I would be home alone for a few hours. I pulled into the driveway, and the crazy man pulled in right after me as if he lived there too. I didn't know what else to do, so I got out of my car. The guy got out of his car at that point as well. He then started walking over to me, cursing and asking what my problem was. I didn't say anything because I didn't know what I could possibly say. The guy wasn't even giving me an opportunity to speak. Then finally he asked why I honked at him. I told him if he didn't want me to honk at him, he should drive better. He claimed he did nothing wrong, and I told him that he went through a red light, which he denied. It was an incident of road rage, but thankfully he hadn't tried to hit me or anything. I told him that he should leave now, and I started to walk towards my house. He continued cursing at me and stuff, but overall he seemed to be more calm now, and I walked away further. He still wasn't leaving though, so I threatened to call the cops if he didn't leave now. For some reason, this angered the man even more. He started walking towards me. I quickly unlocked the door to the house, went inside, and then locked it. He walked right up to the house and tried entering. Then he rang the doorbell like 20 times in a row. I ignored it. I was seriously considering calling the cops if the guy didn't leave. But thankfully, he then walked off. He got back into his car and sat there for like 20 minutes before leaving. At last, he was gone. I couldn't believe how crazy that situation was. I learned from that to drive more defensive, and for a long time, I didn't honk at anybody. Looking back, I think I handled the situation pretty well for being so young. That guy definitely had some anger problems. And just remember, whether you're a good driver or a bad driver, you never know who else is on the roads with you, so be careful. This is something that happened recently that really got to me and even my mother, who's a very rational thinking person. One night, around 9:30 at night, I was driving home from work. My parents are divorced, and my dad forced me to get a job out near him so that I would come to see him more. He lives about an hour away, and I haven't been able to find a new job near my mom's house yet. So every weekend, I drive an hour on Saturday to work, stay at my dad's, work Sunday, then drive home to my mom's that night. For the past couple weeks, my father and I have not been getting along, and it's been fight after fight. So because of this, I've started driving home on Saturday nights and Sunday nights. On the drive home, the road goes into a little bit of an isolated area where there's a field and a road that splits off from the main one into the field. I take this main road every time I do the drive from work or to my dad's house. When I was driving past the field with no other cars around, two bright flashes lit up the entire interior of my car, like someone had taken pictures of me and my car. As I looked back into my rearview mirror, I saw a car on the road in the field turn its headlights on and slowly pull out and start to follow me. They had turned on their headlights after I had seen the two bright flashes, which confused me. When the car began to follow me, two things went through my mind. One was that they just turned onto the road and were going the same direction as me. But the second thought was that this person was following me and I needed to go. So I sped up a bit to put some distance between us, but they sped up too and got closer to me. As they continued to get closer, two more bright flashes lit up my car like more pictures were being taken. Now, these flashes could not have been headlights, because even bright high beams would not light up the entire interior of my car as these did. After the flashes, I looked in my mirror again to see them slowly pull away and turn down another road, disappearing. When I got home, I immediately told my mother what happened, and she tried to rationalize it but couldn't come up with anything. We eventually agreed that this person or people could have been tracking my route that I take every weekend and some weekdays. They possibly would be taking pictures of me in my car to possibly try to kidnap me later or something. Regardless, I'm not going to take that road again, especially at night. This is something that happened back when I was 16. It was about 20 years ago now, but I still remember it very well. I had just recently gotten my driver's license, but I did not have a car yet. One weekend night, my brother asked me to drive him and his friends to the bars and back. My brother is 5 years older than I am, and he was a pretty typical older brother, always doing something crazy. I agreed to drive them because I was excited to drive a car after having recently got my license. So that night, I gave him and a couple of his friends a ride to a bar that was maybe 10 minutes away. We lived pretty close to the city, so there were tons of bars over there. There was also a ton of other stuff, and overall, a lot of streets where it could be confusing to drive. I parked on the side of the road to drop them off. My brother said that he would call me when to come and pick them up. Then they left. I had a cell phone, but this was way back when cell phones were pretty much just good for making calls and maybe some texting. They were not smartphones where you could get directions on the internet and such. After my brother and his friends left, I realized that I had no clue how to get back home. So I sat there in the car before leaving, trying to remember if I knew the way. Back then, after I had just got my license, I was always a little nervous to drive. I really had no idea how to get back, so I started looking around in the car, and eventually I found a map in the glove box. I started looking at the map, trying to figure things out. If you've ever seen those old maps, they can be pretty confusing to look at. I was trying to figure out where exactly I was and where our house was for several minutes. In the time that I was doing that, I heard somebody walking down the sidewalk next to where I was parked. I looked over and saw a man there. He looked like he was coming from the bar. The guy walked up to my passenger side door and waved at me. I rolled down the window slightly, and the guy asked if I could give him a ride. I knew better than to give some random person a ride, and I said no. I thought that the guy was probably drunk and looking for a taxi or anybody to give him a ride home. It was also like 9 p.m. at this time probably. The guy asked me again, saying that it wasn't very far away or something like that. I kept saying no, but the guy didn't want to hear that. He tried opening the door, which thankfully I had remembered to lock after my brother and his friends had left. The guy kept trying to get me to change my mind, which I contributed to him likely being drunk. He didn't really seem that drunk when he talked, but I didn't know why else he would act like that. I continued saying no, and eventually the guy angrily walked away. I was really glad that he was gone from me, and I watched him walking off. The man walked into the parking lot for the bar, which looked pretty full. I saw him walk up to a car and try to open the door. I thought maybe it was his at first, which wouldn't make any sense. But then I saw him looking in the windows before going to another car and trying to open the doors of that one. Now it looked like he was trying to break into vehicles. I just wanted to get out of there at that point. I figured that I would be able to get back home, and I pulled away, mainly because I didn't want that guy to come back. So I left the bar area and drove down the street and then turned. I tried to retrace my steps on going back home, but I only got very confused. A lot of the roads around there looked pretty similar. When you live by the city, there's so many roads and businesses that you can easily get lost. Soon I found myself knowing that I was not going in the right direction. I had no GPS to save me. I went around and came across another building that I had seen before. I decided to just go back near the bar and wait for my brother and his friends. I didn't want to risk getting completely lost. I drove to a small parking lot that was like 2 blocks away from the bar. Then I just waited there. I got out of my car at one point and went to a store and looked around for a while. Then I walked a few blocks away and walked around for a bit just to pass the time. Eventually, after like 2 hours of hanging out down there, my brother texted me to come back. So I went back to my car and then drove over to the bar again. When I got there, I saw flashing police lights. I didn't know what was going on, but my brother and his friends pretty quickly got back into the car. I asked them why the cops were there. They said some guy smashed the window of a car and then tried fighting someone in the bar. I knew right away who it was. We left, and my brother directed me back home. After that night, I'm always glad that I left and didn't give that man a ride. Clearly he was violent and might have done something crazy. If he tried to fight a guy and did smash a window and got the cops called on him, who knows what else could have happened. This happened around 2 years ago. My family was on the way to Mexico. The main point of going was for my grandfather to meet my little brother, who was about 7 at the time. Some background for those who don't know the roads in Mexico. Once you cross the border, you either take the freeway or the toll road. The freeway is a fast pass to getting thrown off the road and off a mountain. The road isn't wide, and big trucks hardly fit in their own lane as if they respect the yellow line in the middle. Toll roads are supposed to be the safer alternative. You pay a certain fee depending on your vehicle at different spots, and there's supposed to be federal policemen along the highway. About 4 hours before we got to my dad's hometown, we approached a bridge with a lot of traffic, which was odd since the rest of the road hadn't been so clustered. Being from the US, we found it odd that some vehicles were driving over the white line on the right side of each lane in the shoulder. My dad, the driver, assumed it was to give access to passing. Keep in mind, we had never driven to Mexico alone, and it had been over 8 years since we were last there. So there was an 18-wheeler in front of us. It was one of those trucks that pulled 2 short trailers at once, but this one was pulling 3. He was moving so slow, being the cause of the traffic in the right lane. Since he was driving on the shoulder, my dad decided to pass him, still being able to do it without crossing the yellow line into the oncoming traffic. We noticed that the other cars were not doing the same thing, but didn't think much about it since we didn't hinder the truck as we passed it. After a while, I looked back out the back window, trying to take a picture of the sunset. When I did this, I saw the same truck coming at us full speed. My brothers noticed that I was staring out the window and looked back. My younger brother, 13 at the time, yelled to my dad that we needed to move. As if things couldn't get worse, there was a traffic jam in the oncoming lane, so there was no way of passing the vehicle in front of us. My mom began to panic, and she was constantly turning in her seat, yelling to my dad that the truck didn't seem to be slowing down. About 3 minutes later, my 7-year-old brother looked back and saw that the truck was tailgating us. The truck was flashing his brights at us, the driver's arm out the window, shooting us the middle finger and motioning us to pull over. As if a miracle, traffic was clearing out at an exit, and my dad managed to leave the truck behind. Around 30 to 40 minutes later, the same truck came flying past us, passing us in the oncoming lane as we were going uphill. He blared his horn and pulled into the correct lane again as a tiny white car came over the speeding hill, almost hitting it. To this day, I get chills thinking about what could have happened if my dad pulled over. Mexico is not a safe place, and when traveling there, depending on where you are, it can be dangerous even just driving. So this happened right before my 20th birthday when I was in the US Navy. I was stationed at a Navy school in South Carolina close to Charleston, but not actually in the city. It wasn't uncommon for people with cars to drive into the city, and everyone was friends with somebody with a car. I was friends with this guy named Peter, and we were close, and he was friends with this New Yorker that I didn't like much. We'll call him Trevor. Trevor had a car though, so we ended up doing a lot together. One night, after all three of us had tanked an important test, I convinced them to go for ice cream. We decided on this ice cream parlor on the far side of Charleston and piled into Trevor's truck. After we had gotten the ice cream, Peter went to start giving Trevor directions, but Trevor insisted he knew a shortcut and we needed to simply enjoy the ride. We didn't have anything early the next day, so we decided to screw it, and this would probably be a funny story later when Trevor got us lost. So we were driving for at least twice as long as it would have taken us to get back to base, but Trevor kept promising us that we were almost there. Meanwhile, we hadn't seen a building in at least 10 miles, and the road was so dark I felt like I was looking into an abyss. Trevor mentioned that he had to pee, so Peter and I told him to just pull over and take a leak. The road was lined with forest, so he had lots of options to go, but Trevor insisted on pulling all the way off that road in case another car came by. He found a dirt road and turned down it, and Peter and I looked at each other and both said that he needed to stop. Peter and I are both from the South, while Trevor grew up mostly in New York City. Peter and I both knew how some people are more of the shoot first, ask questions later type of people if he happened to be trespassing on someone's property. But Trevor kept saying that he was just going to go a little farther through the trees. I was thinking about how we were going to get shot because I wanted ice cream when we went through the tree line. About 20 yards in front of us was a big bonfire that was bright compared to the light from the moon. Immediately, I got nervous, and Peter and I both started screaming at Trevor to turn around. That's when we noticed the figures around the fire and those closing in around us. Trevor was frozen in fear in the driver's seat, so I reached into the front and put the truck into reverse while hitting him repeatedly on the shoulder. Trevor slowly turned around to check behind him to back up, only for him to freeze again. As I also turned, I saw more figures closing around the trail behind us. Peter by now had pulled out a flashlight and was trying to blind the figures while repeatedly telling Trevor to just go and that they'd move. So Trevor finally started to slowly make his way backwards while Peter was whipping his flashlight around. Meanwhile, I was making sure all the doors were locked and rolled up the rear windows and closed the back sliding windows. The crowd behind us parted and we made our way back to the road without any problems. We rode the rest of the ride in almost complete silence, and the three of us have never actually spoken about it since. The only thing that was said on the ride home was when Peter quietly told us that the people around us didn't have faces. Peter was the only one who would have seen them since he was shining the flashlight around. Trevor was focused on backing us up out of there, and I was focused on making sure that the truck was secure with the windows and locks. I trusted Peter though, and I don't think he would lie about something like that either. When my daughter was 2 years old, I was having a tough time as a single mother and decided to take a road trip to the California coast. I made reservations at a cool cabin in the woods within walking distance of the beach. Before I left, my stepfather gave me a loaded .38 revolver which I stored under the driver's seat. Sometime after driving through San Francisco, it was very late and dark and nobody was on the highway. My daughter was sleeping peacefully in her car seat next to me. Back then, we could legally have car seats in the front. I noticed a car coming up behind me, and it passed me, but then slowed down and was driving alongside of me. I sped up and slowed down, but I could not shake him. I looked over, and this guy had his interior light on, and he was furiously gesturing me to pull over. I knew that I had to find a safe place, and there was nobody else on the road, and I was also running low on gas. There was just nothing on the highway for miles, though. I kept driving, and the guy would not leave me alone. I was getting very frightened, but the mama bear in me was coming out, and I was also getting very angry as well. I knew that he could see my kid in the car, who was still sleeping. Finally, there was an exit up ahead at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, so I took the exit with the guy closely following me. I wasn't sure what to do. The gas station was brightly lit, but had no customers. I didn't feel that it was safe to pull in, so I slowly passed it and drove further into the dark, deserted landscape. I then pulled into a large dirt area and drove quite a ways off the highway with him following me. I knew I was in big trouble, and I needed to take control and wanted to put him in a vulnerable situation. I was really angry. I stopped the car, grabbed the gun, and jumped out, locking the car behind me. As he pulled up, I ran around to the passenger side and waited. He then got out of his car and quickly moved towards me, and I suddenly held the gun up, visible in the moonlight. He came to a halt, surprised, and then I leveled the gun across the car, took aim, and waited. He stood there, weighed his options, and then turned around, got back into his car, and left. Not a word was spoken between the two of us. It totally freaked me out and put me on edge for the rest of the trip. But thankfully nothing else like that happened and it was fine. Many years ago, I was out driving late at night. I was kind of out there, far away from the city, and the roads were very quiet. As I drove down the road, I saw up ahead that a car was parked on the side of it. The hood of the car was up, and I saw somebody standing sort of next to it. For some reason, I decided to stop and help them. I guess I'm just a nice guy, but I knew that it could be dangerous to help a random person on the side of the road. But probably there was nothing dangerous about the person, and maybe there was something I could do. Or at least I could make sure that they had a ride coming to get them or something. It was sort of cold out that night, and I didn't want the person to be stranded. So I slowed down, and I didn't pull over, but I stopped right next to the car. Nobody else was driving on the road at all, so it didn't really matter. When I came to a stop, I saw the guy look over from the passenger side of the car. He was standing sort of near the hood. He looked fairly average for the most part. I asked him if he was alright, and the guy said that he needed some help and started walking over. I asked him if he had somebody coming to get him or something like that. He walked all the way to my passenger's window, which I had rolled down. The guy said that he was stranded, and I asked if he had called anyone, and he told me that he didn't have a cell phone. That seemed strange, but I asked him if he wanted to use mine to call roadside service or something. He said that he didn't have any roadside service. The guy said that he really just needed a ride into the nearest town. I didn't want to give him a ride. Something about him seemed sketchy. Maybe it was the fact that he claimed he didn't have a cell phone or roadside service, but it was possible that he didn't have them. I reluctantly said yes and then unlocked the door and the guy got in. I said, "So you're just going up to the next town, right?" The guy said yes, and so I felt a little better and started driving. After we began to go down the road, the guy said that he would direct me. I knew where the next city was and it was not that far, maybe a 5-minute drive just down that same road, and that's where I thought we were going. However, just before that city, a few minutes into the drive, the guy told me to take the next right. I did and figured he lived maybe behind the town that was up ahead. After driving down that road for a while, the guy had me take another turn though. The roads out here were already quiet, but these were even more quiet. I was starting to get a bad feeling. After driving down that road for a while, I asked the guy where exactly we were going. He just said, "Not far." Then he told me to take another turn which led to this dirt road. We drove down that road for probably 10 minutes, and I'm not even joking. I was really sketched out at this point. The guy wasn't saying anything else, and we were just driving in silence pretty much. Finally, we took another turn, and this road looked a little better, mainly because it was not dirt, but it also was a little more open. We drove down this for another 5 to 10 minutes. I didn't know where this guy was having us go, but I just wanted him out of my car. After going down that road for a while, I saw some light up ahead. It wasn't much, but it was something. Before we got there though, there was another road going to the right and the guy told me to take it. I purposely missed it though and kept going straight. The guy told me to turn around and I acted like I made a mistake at first, but I did not turn around. I kept driving and I saw up ahead there was a gas station, so I drove all the way there and pulled in. The guy was pretty much yelling at me at that point. After I got in the gas station, I saw another car there as well as someone working inside. I instantly felt better. I told the guy I could not take him any further and he had to get out. The guy was angry and said that we were almost there. I said, "Good, then you can walk the rest of the way." He urged me to keep driving him, but I said no. So finally, the guy angrily got out of my car and started walking away. I then put directions back on my map and was on my way in seconds. I was so happy that the man was gone. Looking back, I'm not sure where he was taking us, but it definitely was not to the next town. We went way past that. We were driving for like 30 minutes in the middle of nowhere. It was super sketchy, and I'm glad that I found the gas station when I did. I'm not a stranger to weird dreams, but one night I had one which felt very weird. A few years ago, when I was back in high school, I'd gone to sleep and had begun to dream about an odd place, which I remember had maroon walls and deep red carpeting. I started seeing some of my older relatives walking about me, such as my grandfather brushing dust off my clothes. Everyone around me had a very somber demeanor about them, and I had no idea as to why. At some point, some people I didn't recognize began moving about me as well, and I finally asked what was happening. One of the men that I did not recognize essentially told me that I was dying and I was being prepared for the afterlife. As anyone would, I absolutely did not want to go to the afterlife yet. Eventually, they conceded and told me that I would be allowed one more day to live and say goodbye to those I cared about. And then I woke up. I never tend to take dreams seriously, as they're often bizarre enough, but I woke up with the most immense sense of dread. But what could I do? I was upset for the better part of the day, telling some of my friends at school about the dream that I had. Considering how I was acting that day, I was surprised by how little they seemed to care. Later in the day, I had brushed it off as an unsettling dream and nothing more. In the evening, myself and 2 other students from the school were practicing for our driver's license exam. We shared one car and were taking turns driving it across the county with the instructor sitting in the passenger seat. Since this was after school and everybody needed enough time to practice their driving, this thing ran until after sundown. Once everybody had gotten their turns in, the instructor asked if anybody would like to volunteer to drive back to the school in the dark, which my confident self agreed to do. As we were driving back to the school, we were going along the road with many curves, with steep hills on the side of the road, which meant that it was hard to see super far in front of you. With the 2 other students asleep in the back seat, I was thinking how good I had been doing at driving. Then, bright headlights came around one of the curves. My instructor immediately reached over to pull the steering wheel to avoid colliding head-on with the Jeep. If my instructor hadn't been paying attention, I almost certainly would have hit that car, and it would have hit my side of the car the hardest. I firmly believe that I was meant to die that day, but I didn't. I used to work at FedEx and was a delivery driver. This was many years ago now, but I will never forget it. I drove for them for almost 5 years. It was a pretty good job, and I got paid decent. I've always enjoyed driving and considered myself to be pretty good at it. When I worked for FedEx, I also worked pretty close to the city. I would be assigned to a certain area usually and then deliver packages there. I had a route where I would make anywhere from 60 to 100 deliveries in a day sometimes. Most of it was smaller packages to houses and apartments, and every now and then a large package. My truck was the standard size, so it was kind of big, and at first, driving it in some of these streets was tough. Near the city, it can be a lot of cars parked on the side of the street, and some streets are also very narrow. But eventually, I got used to it and drove everywhere no problem. One time, I was working a little bit later. My route took a while longer than usual, and by now it was like 7 p.m. I was almost done, but still had more stops to make. After stopping and dropping off a package at one residence, I began driving to my next stop. I drove down a narrow street that was pretty quiet. A car was driving behind me at that point, I remember, and I went down a couple of the other streets. Probably 5 minutes later, I turned into a quiet back area of an apartment building. When the car that had been driving behind me turned there as well, I found it strange. I had delivered to this apartment building before, so I knew that packages were delivered in the back. And that was just basically a little more than an alleyway. The building had parking out front, as well as underground parking. It was confusing the first time that I delivered there, but I quickly found out. So I delivered the package, and then got back in my truck to see that the car was still there behind me. It was parked as if it was waiting for me. A 4-door sedan, silver color. I didn't pay much attention to who was driving though. But they had enough space to go around me, so it was sort of weird. When I kept going, they started to drive after me. I was wondering if they were trying to follow me for some reason. I turned out of the street behind the apartment complex, making a right. This road was very narrow, and the side of the apartment was to the right, and a park area with a sidewalk was to the left. All of the cars were parked on the right side of the street on this day. Now, this road was quiet, and didn't have anybody else on it other than the parked cars. That is, until I had just started to drive down it, and suddenly a car in front of me that had been parked turned left. The car then stopped, completely blocking the entire road. I had to stop my truck, and was wondering what on earth this person was doing. Meanwhile, the other car was still behind me. I was now completely blocked in. After the car in front of me didn't move for like 30 seconds, I sensed trouble. Then 2 of the back doors opened from the car that was in front of me. I saw these guys start to get out and walk towards my truck. It was in that split second that I made a decision and turned my truck to the left and started driving. It was a tight fit, and I went up on the sidewalk just a little bit, but I made it around the car. Luckily for me, the curb was a little lower than some of the other ones. I didn't know if I would make it for a second, but I got around the car and then turned back onto the road. Then I sped up and turned to the right on the next street, which was a little bit busier. The cars remained back there on the other street. After that, I was able to finish my route, which had already been running late. I was watching behind me the whole time, but didn't see those cars again. Looking back, I have to think that was some kind of a setup. I'm still impressed with myself that I was able to maneuver around the car like that. Like I said, I no longer work for FedEx, but I will always remember that night. My fiance and I went to Colorado for our anniversary getaway, where I popped the question and asked her to marry me. We are from Kentucky, so it was going to be a 16 to 17 hour car ride. We got to Colorado and it was beautiful, and we got engaged and had a good time. The day to leave came around and we got on the road at about noon. The last leg of the drive would take place through the night, as we didn't want to stop at a hotel for another night. We were about 2.5 hours away from home on the back roads of Indiana, because the GPS took us some questionable ways. I was driving the last leg of the trip while my fiancé slept a little. It was about 4 or 5 a.m. at this point, and the sun was just starting to show over the horizon. As I drove down a narrow, curvy road, I started to notice a car had been following me for a nice while, and I got just a tad worried as I didn't have my firearm on me and we were in the country. I thought I was just being paranoid and tried ignoring the car. There was an extra curvy part of the road coming up, and next thing I knew, the car that was behind me got right up on my bumper and flicked their brights on. Not but 30 seconds later, after going around a curve, I saw 4 sets of tires sitting on the road, kind of like a roadblock. I had no time to stop and didn't plan on it. I ran over the tires and felt a heavy smack and bump. Right as I turned the next corner trying to speed up and get away from the car still tailgating me, I glanced over and saw about 5 to 7 people crouching on the side of the road in some bushes. The rising sun was behind them and kind of lit them up so I could see them. At this point, I knew I was in some type of danger, and I floored it and started doing almost 100 miles an hour on this curvy back road. Seeing that I didn't stop and my tire didn't go flat, the car behind me slowed and eventually went out of sight. My fiancé slept through the whole thing, and when we got to the next gas station to fill up, I saw about 5 or 6 nails in all 4 of my tires and a nice chunk of rubber missing. At this point, my fiancé was awake, and the last thing I wanted to do was ruin her engagement trip by telling her what happened, so I never did. I took the car back to the rental office and went on my way. I'm super thankful the car I rented luckily had 4 brand new tires just put on it before we left, because it was a cross-country trip. I still get chills thinking about what would have happened if my tires went flat that day. When I was 16, many years ago, I lived in the Valley area of Los Angeles. At that time, the best part of my week was Saturday nights, when I would meet with my friends at our beloved under 21 nightclub to dance the night away. Most of the time, I'd have to get a ride there and back. I didn't have my own car until a couple of years later when I was in college, but occasionally a family friend would lend me his car, and on one of those Saturday nights, he did. I felt so independent and free to be able to take myself to the club and to be able to leave when I wanted. On the night of this story, I drove to the club and had a great time, dancing with my group of friends to music. At the end of the night, I got into my borrowed car and headed towards home. There were many differing routes I could take to get home, freeways, highways, or city streets. It was after midnight at this time, but most routes that I could take would still be bustling on a Saturday night. I'd had my fill of loud music, laughter, and chattering voices, so I opted for a quieter route home. I took some busy streets, then veered into some quiet neighborhoods that would take me home. If I drove through some quiet house-lined streets, I'd get home a little faster too. GPS hadn't been invented at this time, nor even cell phones, so I had to rely on maps, or just know the chosen routes. I'd heard bad things about a town that I was going to be cutting through, but I'd only been through it during the day, maybe once. Still, I knew how to get through to shave a few minutes off my time. Besides, being someone used to walking or taking buses, I felt perfectly safe now in a well-running car with gas in the tank. I was safer at this moment than almost any other time. That's what I believed. Still, I was a teenage girl alone after midnight in an area I was unfamiliar with, and naive enough to think that nothing bad could happen to me in a locked car. I entered a residential street and only had to go a couple blocks to get to the next town, then to my own. As I drove down a dark, quiet avenue of modest homes, there were streetlights illuminating the unknown. As I smiled while driving, I started to notice a few people walking down the street towards me. At first, I didn't give it much notice. My left turn out of the town was coming up just ahead anyways, but as they got closer, I very quickly realized that it wasn't just a few people. It was a gang of approximately 12 to 15 men, and they weren't casually walking down the sidewalk. They were aggressively running down the middle of the street and right towards me. I suddenly had to slow down almost to a stop as to not hit anyone, and this is when they all got a really good look at me. Looks which turned instantly more excited and animated as they realized I was just a young girl alone. Many exchanged smiling glances between them, and others were whooping, whistling, and calling out things to me. Smoothly, effortlessly, as if they'd rehearsed it ahead of time, several of them stopped me completely by standing right in front of my car, even putting their hands on the hood. Others walked around to my driver and passenger doors and pulled at the handles to open the doors. I didn't always lock the doors when I drove, and the cars didn't have auto locks back then, but I was thanking God that I had had the foresight to do so on this night. Of course, it all happened very fast, but in my shock and terror, it felt like slow motion. My mind quickly adjusted from carefree to possibly being abducted or worse by this large group of men. They had me trapped, and I couldn't drive forward nor reverse out of there, because at this time the car was completely surrounded by men. As a couple of guys picked up sticks and other objects to try to bust my windows, I knew that I had to think clearly and act fast. I did the only thing I could think of. I started driving forward. Having blocked my car completely, I could see the surprise on some of their faces as they now had to move out of the way or risk being run over. I'd immediately decided that if they didn't move, I would run over them. All the men standing in front of my car quickly jumped out of the way, and I sped up as I took the left turn out of that town. I did make it home safely, but my heart didn't stop beating out of my chest for the rest of the night. Of course, I thought about it for a long time as well. I felt proud of the way I'd handled the situation, but I kept running through the possibilities of what I could have done differently. What if they didn't get out of the way and I actually hit a couple people with the car? How would I have lived with myself? Should I have just sat in place and honked the horn to hopefully wake up people from the homes around me? What if one of the men had pointed a gun at me? I'm very happy that it turned out the way that it did, but it could have turned out so much worse. I'm a delivery driver for Amazon. Several months ago, I had a really weird experience. The route that I was driving went through mostly this one city, and as you know, countless people use Amazon Prime to buy items, so I often found myself delivering to a lot of the same houses time and time again. A lot of them blended together for me because they all looked similar, but there was one house in particular that I remembered. It was in a pretty average neighborhood. The street was quiet, and there were lots of houses on both sides. Most of the houses had about the same size front and backyards. I delivered to one house, sort of about halfway down the street. The house had 2 floors and a big tree out front. When I delivered a package there, I would walk up a walkway that was in the middle of the front yard leading to the front step. Then I would set the package on the front step and go back to my truck. But I remember one time delivering there, as I was walking up to the front step, I saw somebody in the top window. There was a man looking out and just staring at me. It was the creepiest thing, because the way he was staring at me was very intense. I saw him walking up and was instantly weirded out by it. After I dropped off the package and walked back, before I got inside my truck, I looked, and he was still staring at me. The guy was tall, thin, and that's about all I could really tell. Several days later, I had another delivery to the same house, and only realized that it was the same one when I saw the guy again. He was in the same place, looking through the window, staring at me the same way as before. The very next day, he had another package, and he did the same thing. I thought this guy was very strange. Then, a few days later, I had another delivery to make there. By now, I knew it was the house, and I was already expecting to see the guy staring at me. I looked up to the window, but he actually wasn't there. That was a nice change of pace. However, as I approached the front door, I saw a piece of paper was taped to it. I read it, and it said, "Please deliver package to back door today. Gate is open." There was then an arrow pointing to the left. I thought this was strange. I wasn't sure why they wanted the package at the back door. But I looked past the weird behavior of the guy and thought maybe it was just a valuable item that I was delivering or something. Maybe one of his packages had been stolen in the past. I walked to the left and saw that at his property, the entire backyard was all fenced in. The fence wrapped all the way around to connect with the ends of his house, and the fence was also about 7 feet high, and not chain link, but a solid material, so you couldn't see inside at all. I walked through the gate, and the backyard was pretty normal looking, just grass and a few trees and plants scattered around. I walked along the side of the house until I got to the back door. I set the package down on the ground right outside of it, and then started heading back for the gate. But when I got there, the gate was now closed. I tried opening it, but I couldn't get it. It was like somebody had locked it from the outside. Then I walked to the other side of the house to see if there was another gate on that side. Sadly, there wasn't. I was walking back to the gate when I saw the man was now standing outside of the back door to his house. He was just staring at me again. My heart started racing. I wasn't sure what to do, so I just said, "I tried going out that gate, but it won't open." The man didn't say anything. He was not staring at me as intense or creepy as before, but he was sure coming across as strange still. He then pointed to his back door, which was already open. He was signaling me to go inside of his house. I really didn't want to, but I also didn't know what else to do, so I walked forward and then went inside. The man then followed me in. When I got inside of his house, it was pitch black almost. Every single window was covered up completely, and all of the lights were off. I just walked straight ahead. The whole time, I was so nervous that something was going to happen, like the guy was going to whack me on the back of the head or something. I could just barely see, but I did see that the front door was ahead. When I had made it there, the man was still walking behind me, but he didn't say or do anything. I reached for the handle of the front door, afraid that it would be locked like the gate, but this one opened up. I made it outside, and then was on his front step. I then walked quickly back to my truck, and when I was almost there, turned and looked behind me. The man was still inside of his house, but standing right inside the door, staring at me. He was smiling the creepiest smile I've ever seen. I got in my truck and drove to my next delivery, trying to calm myself down. When I made it back that day, I begged my boss to change my route. I told him about the crazy guy, and luckily, I was able to change my route with a coworker. I didn't have to go to that guy's house anymore. Several weeks later, I found the coworker who took that part of my route. I asked him if he noticed the guy staring or anything, but he told me that he hadn't noticed. I was glad that maybe the guy stopped doing that, but I also found that strange. It made me wonder if his strange behavior was targeted at me specifically. Looking back, I still don't know what the guy was doing. Why he always stared at me and then locked me in his backyard, I don't know. I still get the creeps thinking back to it.
A few years ago, I had traveled for work a few states away. I was driving back on my own, and it would be a pretty long drive. On the road trip back, at one point, I stopped at a rest stop. It was nighttime, and I needed a break from driving to use the restroom and stretch my legs. This was a quieter rest stop, and I was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It was maybe 9 o'clock at night, and I was planning on driving maybe another hour or two before finding a hotel. The rest stop was not that large, but there were a decent amount of other people around. After I parked my car, I went inside and used the restroom. As I came back out, I started to walk to my car. There was one guy there that caught my attention. He was standing off in the grass area next to a tree by himself. The guy was just creepily staring at me. At first, I didn't really think much of it other than it seemed a little strange, but the lighting wasn't great, so maybe he didn't mean to seem creepy. But he was certainly looking in my direction. I just kept walking and looked away and soon made it to my car. When I got there, I went inside and looked at the man again. He was still staring at me, and it just struck me as really odd, because he still seemed to have a creepy look on his face, at least from where I was. He was pretty far away, but there was no doubt in my mind that he was looking in my direction. Overall, he seemed like an average guy. He was wearing a hat, was about average height and weight, maybe kind of skinny, but the way that he stared at me just seemed really strange. But I wasn't really scared or anything because I was in my car and I could just drive away from him now. So I did. I left the rest stop, drove for maybe another hour and a half, and then stopped in whatever town that was and got a hotel. Things went fine, and I continued to drive for the next day, basically driving all day until I arrived back home that night at about 7 p.m. I know that's when I got back because I remember looking at the time. So when I got back, I unpacked and stuff. I was in the kitchen and heard something at the front of the house. It sounded like it was coming from outside. It wasn't a knock on the door, but it sounded like somebody was maybe outside at the front step or near it. I don't recall if what I heard was footsteps or a bush moving or what exactly it was, but I walked over to the front of the house and looked out of the window. I saw that the same guy was standing there on my front step. He never knocked on the door. I turned on the outside light and he just ran away. He sprinted out of my yard and then down the street. I was so freaked out by the whole thing. I called my best friend and she talked to me on the phone until I calmed down. I could not believe how I was seeing this guy again. The last time that I had seen him was hundreds of miles away. After that night, though, I never saw him again. I still don't know how to explain that. I've told several people about it, and everybody agrees that it's insane. Some people think that maybe I saw a different guy but thought that it was the same person. And I guess that that's possible, as I never got a really great look at him either time. But that would just be such a coincidence that two guys hundreds of miles apart, wearing basically the exact same thing, were staring at me creepy. I think it's also possible that it was just a coincidence that he lived by me, but I find that highly unlikely as well. I don't know, but I'm just glad I never saw him again after that.